Chairs in the front hall, please. I'd like to declare that we do have a quorum, and I also wish to confirm that I've reviewed the warrant and the constable's service, and the warrant for fall town meeting has been properly posted and served. I would like to welcome all the town meeting reps to tonight's meeting. I want to remind you that all amendments to the articles shall be submitted on the forms which you can get either from the town clerk or me. If you know prior to town meeting that you intend to file an amendment, you can see me or Patricia Zuris prior to the meeting for the forms, or you can email them to me and I will make the necessary copies and distribute them to town council and the typist so that these can be ready before town meeting begins. And if you can get any proposed amendments to either of us prior to the introduction of that article, town council will have the opportunity to review the amendment and correct non-fatal language, which will expedite the meeting. By doing so, you will enable Ted Luter to type the amendment for screen display, or John Souza, whoever's doing the typing, so it is ready when the article is under consideration and help expedite the town meeting process. The form is created in an original in 3 copies. The white copy goes to me. The yellow copy goes to the amendment assistant. The pink copy goes to the town clerk, and you retain the orange copy for your own records. All questions and debate shall emanate from the microphone facing the moderator in the center of the hall and shall go through the moderator. Board or committee members or other town officials or department heads may use other microphones to answer questions or provide information to the meeting. Speakers shall refrain from rhetorical or argumentative questions and shall only ask questions seeking needed information. The questions should be in the who, what, when, where, and why mode. They should never start or end with, isn't it true, or wouldn't you admit? Those are best served for when you're debating those articles, and I would prefer not to have to rule questions out of order, but I am bound by the laws and regulations that define our conduct, and I will do my best to enforce them fairly and respectfully. With respect to debate, speakers are encouraged to be brief. Please do not refer to any prior speaker by name. The proper designation is to call him or her the previous speaker. Please refrain from personal attacks. Challenging or arguing in opposition to another's position is fair game and is what this meeting is all about. Intentional slander against any individual or group cannot be tolerated. Discussion of pending litigation will not be permitted unless specifically included in the warrant article being debated. If, during the course of debate, I observe several speakers on one side of an issue but none in opposition, I will interrupt to inquire if there are any who wish to express the opposing position or offer an amendment. If there are none, I shall end debate and move the question. If there is opposition, I will move that party to the front of the line and allow debate to continue. I trust that you will all appreciate how this will advance our mutual goal of moving town meeting along. Those who may be next in line, should I ever have to exercise this process, you have my apologies in advance. There will not be any debating from the sponsor's podium. We have 4 articles which the town manager and I have determined would be appropriate for a consent agenda. So after Article 1, I shall request that we entertain a consent agenda for Articles 2, 4, 5, and 12, which are routine articles that we approve every fall or ones in which there should be no opposition. Thank you. We do have some preliminary acknowledgments to make, so if you will kindly allow the Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Patricia Wojcik, to the presenter's podium for a moment.
Thank you, John. As has been our tradition for several years now, we like to recognize those who have reached a significant milestone as town meeting members. This fall, we have 3 members of town meeting who have for the first time reached a 10-year milestone. So I'd like them to come up and receive a certificate of achievement to that effect. And they are Bill Nolan, Mike Raisbeck, and Jean Whiting. So congratulations to the 3 of them.
Thank you, Chairman Wojcik. I would now like to ask that there be a motion for allowance of a consent agenda. I will just entertain it from the floor. Second? All in favor, just raise your hands. All opposed? Thank you very much. Now I'll turn the meeting over to the town manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, and good evening, town meeting representatives and those in the audience as well as those watching from home. First article, which is customary for every town meeting, is to hear reports of town officers and committees. This evening we have 4 such reports. Under Article 1, the first will be Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Jay Lang, will give us a report on the school facilities. Next, George Zaroulis and others will give us a report on the UMass Lowell West Campus Planning Committee. Sam Chase will be providing a report on the Charter Review Committee's completion of their efforts, but in the interest of efficiency and recognizing the fact that there are articles pertaining to the Charter Review Committee towards the end of the warrant, we're going to defer that report until later in the warrant when we arrive at that, and that way the information will be fresh and hopefully will help you with your consideration of those articles. And lastly, in accordance with the town bylaws, our Finance Director, John Souza, will provide a 5-year financial forecast. So with that, I'll turn the podium over to Dr. Lang, who will give a report on the school facilities.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening. Thank you for allowing me to provide an update this evening on a project that you approved a year ago. As you may recall, I first came before a town meeting in the fall of 2015 seeking $200,000 to fund a comprehensive facility assessment of the Chelmsford Public School facilities. With the funding appropriated, we engaged the services of an architectural engineering firm to conduct a needs assessment, document existing conditions, and assist us in preparing short and long-term plans for the Chelmsford Public Schools to guide our work in the years to come. The short-term plan for the Chelmsford Public Schools brought me back before town meeting last fall, seeking an appropriation of $7.9 million to construct modular classrooms at each of our 4 elementary schools, the Byam, Center, Harrington, and South Row Elementary Schools. This was in an effort to provide much-needed additional classroom space at the elementary level of the district to assist with current and projected student enrollment, as well as to provide the required classroom space to implement full-day kindergarten in the district. As you may recall, there was considerable dialogue about the funding amount, anticipated project timeline, construction contingencies, both financial and spatial, and our ability to open the new classroom space for the current 2017-18 school year. I am happy to report that the project was completed this past summer on time and under budget to the tune of approximately $1 million below town meeting's approved budget. This is $1 million that the town will not need to borrow for this project, freeing up financing capacity for other town projects in the future. These next few slides provide an overview of the new modular classroom buildings, which have been very well received by students, parents, and staff in the district. Many town meeting representatives and residents were able to join us a few weeks ago for an open house we hosted to allow the community an opportunity to visit and witness firsthand the construction, new classrooms, technology, and curriculum materials that our lucky students and staff enjoy each day in these new buildings. For those of you who are not able to attend, I hope you enjoy this short video produced by Chelmsford Telemedia that provides an overview of our new modular classrooms.
Welcome here to the Center School Pods, our great new learning environment here that we have for the 4th graders in town. Great new space for learning, great new bright environment, technology, furniture. It was really needed to free up some space that we needed here in the building, so it's been an added benefit here in our building. The kids are loving it.
We love our new classroom. These classrooms are so cool. I really like the touchscreen TVs. The classrooms are really clean. The chairs are really comfy.
The pods are a perfect temperature.
I like how we're the first ones in here.
I'm with her.
Even the desks are new.
The parents who have come through have had nothing but great things to say, so we're really enjoying it. Thanks.
We wanted you to have an opportunity for those who weren't able to come out and see them, just to get a little bit of a flavor for what these new buildings look like. The project would not have been possible without the commitment, support, and vision of many individuals who made this project a reality here in Chelmsford. I personally would like to thank them at this time. I thank the Board of Selectmen, the Finance Committee, and town meeting representatives for supporting the funding request brought before you a year ago. I thank the school committee members, both past and present, for supporting the short-term facility plan, including the implementation of full-day kindergarten, a long-sought goal for the district. A special thanks to Town Manager Cohen for supporting both this capital funding request as well as the general operating budget request that allowed for the implementation of full-day kindergarten this past fall. And finally, to three of the individuals, Gary Persichetti, Kathleen Canavan, and Brian Curley, who worked tirelessly this past spring and summer to get this project out to bid and who oversaw the day-to-day construction projects at each of the 4 elementary schools this past summer. This could not have been done without everyone working together to make this a reality. I personally thank all involved for their support of this effort and making this project a reality in Chelmsford. It will benefit the community and kids for years to come. Thank you very much. Just one last slide. So that was the short-term plan. As for the long-term plan for the Chelmsford Public Schools, I did just want to let town meeting know that we did submit a statement of interest to the Massachusetts School Building Authority last April for a potential new or renovated school in the coming years. Representatives of the MSBA came out this past summer to tour our facilities, document our existing conditions, and will be providing feedback later this fall on whether we'll be invited into the funding pipeline for a future school construction project. I'll provide updates as our long-term plan progresses. I know you have a lengthy agenda before you this fall. However, I thought it was important to share the results of your prior actions and to thank you personally for all you do to make Chelmsford the desirable community that it is. Thank you for allowing me to present this evening.
Our next presenter, George Zaroulis and others are coming, John Edward and others, and coming up to the podium to present a study committee regarding the future of the UMass Lowell West campus.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. UMass Lowell West Campus Planning Committee was tasked to conduct a visioning and planning process for the future of the UMass Lowell West Campus. The committee was made up of 7 people. George Dixon was chair. He's representing the Board of Selectmen. Myself, I was representing the Planning Board. Dr. John Crane, who's with me this evening, was representing the Vinyl Square Strategic Action Plan Committee. John Edward, he's here from the Housing Advisory Board. And we had 3 neighborhood residents, Helen Blasioli, Linda Gervais, and Angela Serra, who acted as our clerk. She did a great job taking the minutes. A special thank you to John Edward, who helped pull the sections together and do some of the writing. The property is located on 255 Princeton Street near the Lowell line. Used to be the old training school. and now is UMass Lowell West Campus. It's got 34 acres. A portion of the property is considered wetlands, probably about 9 or 10 acres. There's 4 structures presently on the building, and they're in various degrees of disrepair. The present zoning is low-density, single-family houses by right on 40,000 square feet. You can see there's the location of it, and you got it's surrounded by Meadowwood and Windermere, which are 55 and older developments. So we had a public input process. The committee conducted a SWOT analysis amongst ourselves. The SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We did this as a committee. We identified various perspectives, the issues likely to arise, and the potential conflicts. The committee accepted public input, questions, and comment at each meeting. In each meeting, we probably had 20 to 30 people at each meeting, and they're all from the neighborhood. Then the committee held a public input session where NEMCOG ran the public input session, and we did a SWOT analysis there as well. Then at that point, we added what the committee SWOT analysis to that that we had done. And then the public was asked to put stickers to rank preferences of the SWOT analysis. We also sought input from town departments, as you can see, town manager, DPW, North Water, police and fire, building commissioner, public health, and conservation agent. Then we also had David Hedison came in from the Chelmsford Housing Authority. He made a presentation. There was many people in the audience, probably about 30 people that evening. The vision included an age-restricted independent community with services and amenities available to those within the community and the surrounding neighborhoods. The CHA vision basically was 55 and older, mix of housing unit styles, project to include affordable component, services, amenities, wellness facility, medical care, meals program, activities, life lease options. So under the current zoning, you could develop single-family homes. You could change the zoning from RB to RC, which will allow multifamily homes. Building and other structures for general municipal purposes was discussed. Obviously, preservation of open space, potential for available for passive recreation. Talk was about wounded warrior housing and elderly housing, historic preservation, and one of the options or potential uses was for the town to do nothing there and just allow it to be. So West Campus vision and design amenities, truly affordable, age-restricted housing, 55 years and older. Preference for veterans, age 55 plus, as well as a preference for Chelmsford residents, current and former. A continuum of care include facilities and independent living facilities. No more than 4 stories with low-rise buildings on the perimeter of the site, buffering and screening to protect the nearby residents. Have an open space component so that the nearby residents continue to use the open space areas. Amenities for the residents, such as a recreation room, health center, wellness center, pool, dining room, cafe, lounge, function room, studio, library, garden area, salon, and transportation services. West Campus vision, municipal benefits should deliver tangible benefits to the town, such as increased tax revenue, provision for affordable housing for seniors, job creation, and passive recreation opportunities. Little side note there is that right now the town doesn't collect any taxes because it's owned by the university. So we're trying to get that looked at to put it back on the rolls. To the extent practical, the project should then generate the revenue to offset the costs incurred by the town and delivering the important community benefits offered by the project. Consideration should be given to a development that is a partnership between a nonprofit entity such as a housing authority and a for-profit entity. Create an intergenerational environment, including a partnership with the UMass Lowell School of Health Sciences, utilizing active participation of student nursing, gerontology, nutrition, physical therapy, and wellness program. So at this point, I think Paul will give you an update on the legislative process that's involved. Do you guys have anything else? That's fine. So thank you very much for your time.
I want to thank the committee for all their efforts in doing this. And the reason that this final slide is left blank is We don't know what the legislative process is, and let me explain what will happen next. We just don't know when. The UMass West Campus Lowell property was a gift to the university from Dr. Wang, and therefore it's an asset of the university. If the university has no plans to use that site in its master plan for future development and expansion of the university, which many of you followed has been quite extensive, if the university were to surplus it under current state law, that property would go back to the state general government and offer to other state agencies, and then if there were no interest in the state agencies or no interest by the town, it would then go out to private sale in the market, and any proceeds from that sale would go to the state's general fund. That's the catch for the university. The university would not receive any revenue from the disposition of the site. So over 2 years ago, as town manager, I was approached by the university and asked if the town would consider supporting special legislation for the disposition of the property that would allow for the proceeds for the disposition of the site to go back to the university. And obviously that would have to be followed by our legislative delegation. It would need the support of the delegation, and obviously the delegation would look to the support from the community, first to the Board of Selectmen and then ultimately to the community as a whole, and certainly from town meeting. The university thought in the initial stages a couple years ago that they would receive millions of dollars from the disposition of the site, because at that time the town was not in conformance with the state's affordable housing law, and therefore a disposition that would lead to high density housing would produce greater revenue for the university. As we now know, in Chelmsford, we've had a considerable sea change in the interest in affordable housing in the last 6 to 9 months, and projects that have been approved by the Board of Appeals and or are currently before the Board of Appeals and the Planning Board for rental apartment units. We are now in compliance with the safe harbor for affordable housing, and we are approaching 9%, and if the projects that are on the table for consideration were to be approved, we would exceed the town's 10% requirement under state law, which then removes the risk of high-density development from the private sale of the property. Since that has occurred, the university's interest has waned in advancing the legislation. So at this point in time, we are in constant communication with our delegation, and we are assured we will be notified if and when such bill is to be filed for consideration by the town. Until that happens, we're basically going back to what has unfortunately been the status quo for the last generation, which is basically a vacated site, which, as many may be aware, the town has sought state funding to remove the hazard from the site, i.e. the vacant buildings. We had a fire a few years back, which not only produces the risk of fire, but also produces in the atmosphere hazardous materials from the site. So we will continue our efforts to seek funding to remove the neglected buildings that can't be salvaged from the site and to secure the site. But absent that, at this point, the ball is in the university's court, and until anything changes, we don't foresee any action. So at this point, the committee has achieved its goal. It's created the vision, which you've just heard, and until such time that legislation is filed and movement on this occurs, we will stand ready to respond at an appropriate time. So I thank you for your attention to this matter this evening. Thank you. Thank you. The final presentation at this time will come from our Finance Director, John Souza. In accordance with our town bylaws, he will provide you with our 5-year financial forecast for the community, which again gives you some context as we're considering the financial articles this evening. So, John.
Thank you, Town Manager Cohen. Good evening. I'd like to provide you tonight with some highlights of our updated 5-year financial forecast. In this presentation, we'll take a look at the summary of our revenues, expenditures, and then look at the overall forecast. Starting under revenues, when we look ahead for the coming fiscal year, our largest source of revenue continues to be property taxes. Under state law, we start with our levy base of $93.83 million, which is a historical figure based on the prior year's levy limit, and then we add the 2.5% increase allowed by law. Then you add the new growth of about $1.4 million due to new construction, redevelopment, et cetera. And then finally, $4.31 million, which is for excluded debt, which is for projects such as for the schools, the sewer system, and DPW, which have previously been approved, where voters have voted a Prop 2.5 debt exclusion. So that gives us a total for taxes of $101.89 million. Then going on to state aid, this is our second largest source of revenue. We estimate that Chapter 70 will be increased by a modest amount of about $100,000. That's about less than 1%. We're estimating that general municipal aid will increase about $100,000, and that's about roughly a 2% increase. State revenue trends are kind of uncertain at this point. We've had ups and downs. July and August were just okay. September's been a little better, but it's really too early in the fiscal year to draw a conclusion of how state revenue will be. Then moving on to the next category is available funds. As we've said before, this is a collection of reimbursements from various revolving and special purpose funds. Two notable ones are the Child Care Revolving Fund, which makes a contribution for to reimburse for the cost of health insurance to employees in the child care program. Also, sewer betterment and capital construction funds. As we've seen in past years, each year we do a transfer from sewer betterments to fund debt service for costs of the sewer system that were completed after 2005. Moving on to local receipts, this is the last revenue category. Motor vehicle excise tax accounts for about over 50% in this category. We're anticipating motor vehicle revenues to increase about $300,000 to $5.1 million for the coming fiscal year. And this is based on strength that we've seen in motor vehicle excise collections over the last 2 fiscal years. And so total local receipts are estimated at $10.28 million, and will increase about $535,000 in total. On this slide, if you bring all of the revenue categories that I just mentioned together, total revenues are $132,480,000. Then moving on to the expenditure side, for personnel, for general government, the forecast includes step increases for eligible personnel and a 2% cost of living allowance for all the years in the forecast. General government expenses are expected to increase 2% unless otherwise noted in the forecast. And then for the Chelmsford Public Schools, for their budget, we're estimating a 2.5% increase for all of the years in the forecast. And then finally for Neshoba, at this point we're estimating a 5% increase. However, as we know from past years, we really need to wait until we see the official student counts that are taken as of October 1st and reported to the state, because that can have an impact on our assessment. Moving on to debt service, the first category is excluded debt service. And since you have this in the detailed forecast, I'm just going to advance to the column charts. You can see that graphically it's a little easy to understand. Excluded debt service is shown in red. This current fiscal year, it's about $4.3 million. It's going to decline next year about $62,000. And as you can see in the graph, it declines each year going out. And finally, it gets down in the outer years of the forecast. It gets down near, it's down significantly. Oops, excuse me. Non-excluded debt service is shown in blue. And as we know, that includes borrowing for the various years' capital plans, as well as a number of building projects that have been completed. Non-excluded debt service is $7.62 million this fiscal year. It's projected to decrease down to $7.5 million next year, and then go down to $7.4 million the following year. The forecast assumes that we'll continue to borrow for the capital improvement plan at $3 million annually. Finally, betterment-funded debt service is shown in yellow, and as the name implies, this is is borrowings that were completed for the latter phases of the sewer system, and we use betterment funds to pay for the debt service. That remains in a range, as you can see. It's pretty consistent. That's going to remain between 2.3 and 2.4 million during the 5-year forecast. And then this slide just shows employee benefits. Our Middlesex assessment for fiscal year 19, we have an actual number. It's going to increase roughly about $500,000 to $8.3 million, and this is based on the latest actuarial valuation that Middlesex County Retirement had calculated in early 2016. One note is that next year in fiscal year 19, we're going to make our final payment of $297,000 towards the 2002 Early Retirement Incentive Program. So after that, that will save the town. I just wanted to make note of it because you can see sometimes these early retirement incentives, the costs can stay with us for a good number of years. Finally, our health insurance, that's always a difficult number to estimate, but we're using 7.5 as a projected increase in the forecast for all of the years. So if we pull all of the different expenditure categories together, you can see that the total is $132.4 million. And then this slide summarizes each of the years. Because you have this, and I know this is a little difficult to read with all the numbers, I'm going to go to a summary slide. And you can see that for fiscal year 19, at this point, I'm projecting that we'll have a balanced budget for fiscal year 19. I do not foresee any deficits. For fiscal year 20, we're looking at this point of a deficit of $128,000, and then it goes on out. But you can see, one thing I would draw your attention to is, although those numbers might sound big, when you do it as a percentage of the town's budget, it's really for the next, for fiscal year 20, 21, and 22, it's only equal to about 0.25% of the town's budget. And then finally in 23, it's 0.5%. So I'm confident that that's something we can manage going forward. Whenever we pull a forecast together, it's important to remember that we're still early in the budget cycle, and there are 3 main uncertainties at this point. State aid, which I spoke about earlier, and on the expenditure side, health insurance premiums, we should know more next February, and then our Neshoba assessment, we'll know a bit more in late January after once Neshoba, once state aid is out there and Neshoba releases their budget. And finally, for the health insurance budget, just a note, this year's health insurance budget for active and retirees is just about $12.3 million. So every 1% increase in the health insurance budget is equal to $123,000. So that just kind of underscores the large impact that increases in health insurance can have. Just to speak about reserves for a moment, our financial plan includes maintaining a healthy stabilization fund and dedicating our reserves towards extraordinary capital when available. The town ended fiscal year 17 with $1.07 million in free cash, and the amount of free cash, as we know from past town meetings, varies each year. For fiscal year 17, the main sources, just to highlight a couple, were higher than anticipated revenues from motor vehicle excise and from permits for building, plumbing, electrical, things of that nature. This is a slide showing our free cash history back to 2007, and you see that in the table it shows it as a percentage of our general budgeted operating revenues. This year, as I said, free cash is a little lower. It equaled 0.8 of our total budgeted revenues, which is a little on the lower side. However, when you look back in the history, you see that we had a similar amount as on a percentage basis in 2011 and 2014. Just to take a closer look at the stabilization fund for a moment, this chart shows the history of the stabilization fund since 2008 and the updated plan going forward. During the last fiscal year, we withdrew just about $730,000 from that was back at April town meeting. This body voted about a year ago to transfer $747,861 into the fund, and we had investment earnings during the year of about $172,000. So we closed the fiscal year on June 30th with a stabilization balance of $8.94 million. And one thing I'd like to point out is on the transfer out column, the transfers on the plan for the next 5 years are there as a contingency to help us with unforeseen events, such as a exceptionally stormy winter or things of that nature. This next chart shows the history of the stabilization fund as a percentage of the total budgeted operating revenue, and you see the fiscal year 18 in red. And this just shows that although we continue to make contributions to the stabilization fund, we need to keep maintaining that going forward so that we keep our stabilization balance as a percentage of our budget at an adequate level. This is something that credit rating agencies such as Standard & Poor's pay a great deal of attention to when they examine our finances. This helps us. This will help us maintain our AA+ bond rating, reduce our long-term borrowing costs, and also gives us financial flexibility to respond to emergencies. Next, I'd just like to talk for a moment about our long-term liabilities. We have two of them. The first one on this slide is our unfunded pension liability with Middlesex County. It's currently about $96.3 million. That's based on the most recent actuarial valuation. We are on track to pay this down by 2035 under the current plan in accordance with state law. And then the next slide shows the next of our large liabilities, which is OPEB. And this is the cost of providing health insurance to both current and future retirees. The town recently had an actuarial valuation completed as of December 31st, 2016. It was completed and produced in early September. And we'll be talking more about this in the weeks ahead. But the good news is that our OPEB liability decreased significantly. You can see on the slide that it decreased $22 million since the last valuation, so that's quite a decrease. So you may ask the questions, why? How did that happen? In speaking with our actuarial consultant, there are really two large reasons that they attribute it to. The first is MedX, which is a Medicare supplement plan. It's the most actively subscribed to by the highest number of retirees. Whenever you have an actuarial valuation, you have to make certain assumptions. And the good news is, because of the town of Chelmsford's efforts through municipal health insurance reform, the actual increases in our MedX plan premiums were not as high as what was originally forecast. The second thing is the actuary has to make an assumption on what type of inflation factor they see for medical costs, because as we all know, medical costs never seem to go down. And the good news there is that our actual experience with medical cost inflation was lower than what was originally anticipated. So that's the two main reasons for this. And then when you add these two together, it looks like a daunting number of $167 million. It's important to note as we go to the next slide, that this shows our OPEB trust funding plan. And what I wanted to point out to you here is that we've been adding, with town meeting and the support of the town manager, board of selectmen, and everyone in this room, we've been contributing $1 million annually towards our OPEB liability. And what we learned in this most recent study is that's roughly 50% of the amount that we'd need to fully pay off this liability each year over a 30-year period. The good news is that you can see on this chart that we're making progress. Oops, let me go back. During the last few years, about 5 years ago, town meeting authorized the town to start investing our OPEB assets with the Commonwealth's PRIT, or Pension Reserves Investment Trust Fund. And last year in fiscal year 17, due to the exceptional strength in the stock or equity markets, the town earned a record $737,000 during fiscal year 17, and we closed the year with $6.79 million in the OPEB trust. The plan that you see here calls for us to continue contributing $1 million annually from the general fund, plus amounts from the SOAR and PEG Access or telemedia enterprise funds. And you can see from this chart, if we can continue doing this over the next next 10 years, and we have to do it beyond that, but just to show you, in 10 years, we'll be up, if things hold the way they are, we'll be approximately up near 25 to 27% funded. This year we're actually, based on our last actuarial evaluation, we're about 8% funded. To show you that's good progress from where we were just 2 years ago, we were only about 4% funded. So, you know, to summarize, it's OPEB is not something that we're going to be able to solve immediately in the short term, but by addressing this and making all these contributions into this fund, it's going to put the town in a better financial position in the years ahead. So thank you for your attention. That concludes the 5-year forecast.
Thank you, John. But this next slide just provides you with a report on the current financial status of our funds as we enter into town meeting. As John noted, our free cash was certified at $1,076,000 this past fiscal year. Our sewer enterprise fund free cash is $1.5 million. PEG access $160,000. The golf course enterprise fund has just over $75,000. Our general stabilization fund balance, as John noted, is $8.9 million, and the balance in the forum maintenance fund is $153,000. With that, the final slide I have for your consideration at this point is a summary of the financial article recommendations for what will come before you this evening. As you can see, the financial articles are listed at the beginning of our warrant, Articles 2, and they conclude with Article 14. And there's the requested funding amount and the funding source. So again, we'll go through those respectively as we address each article. And the last thing I'm going to have this evening is I want to call up our town accountant, Darlene Luce here. As you notice, there are a significant borrowing for a community preservation fund for Article 8 on the Roberts Field Playground, as well as some additional transfers from the community preservation fund under Articles 10 and 11. And so we're going to ask Darlene just to give a brief overview of the financial status of the community preservation fund.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good evening, everyone. I think I have to go all the way to the end, right, to this? Is the slides all the way to the end? Do you want me to all the way to the end of this presentation? Oh, okay, so there's no slides up on the thing. Okay, sorry about that. So the presentation that I'm going to be just looking to the back of the packet of the town meeting articles, the last few the slides that I'll be speaking to. So the first sheet that's in there that actually just talks about the current projects that are on the books that we have now. I want to make sure everybody finds the pages. So just the current projects, starting with the admin operating of the $50,000, community woods, Oak Hill capital improvements, Sheehan Farm, recreational improvements, the turf fields, the Varney Playground, the 2 town halls, and then that's it. So those are the current projects that we have. Majority of those projects are on the books basically because we just have debt payments for these projects. Chelmsford Woods, Sheehan Farm, the turf fields, Varney Park, and the 2 town halls are all, every year we vote money in the spring to pay the debt for these projects. So these are just basically that you'll see that there's a column in there for town meeting articles. Those are the appropriations in the spring that we have to pay for the debt. So that's just really just an overview. There's really no new projects. We haven't voted any new projects recently in the past few years. The second page we put, what I did is put the funds I thought it was be good to see what's in the individual funds. So every year we vote 10% of the revenues from that prior year and put them into these 3 buckets: open space, historic, and community housing. What I did was I've started with the balance as of June 30th, what we added at the Springtown meeting, what we took out at Springtown meeting, and the current balance. What we're doing with the 10%, the 10% goes in, and we're taking the 10% right out to pay for the debt. The CPC committee has decided that they'll first draw down on the 10% for debt, then they'll go to the reserve to pay the balance of the debt. So that's why you always see, we always vote, we put in the 10%, and then the next article you'll see we're taking out those monies to pay for the debt. So though there's balances that are in those 3 accounts, it's not very substantial. Like I said, we're putting the 10% in and taking it right out. The reserve for expenditure, the balance starting in June 30, starting the end of the year, was at $384,000. We added $150,000 to the reserve, but then we took out $355,478 for the remainder of the debt that's due. And then the last piece of the financials is the undesignated fund balance. This is where, when I close out the books, it's kind of like where the free cash is. When I close out all the revenues and expenditures of this account, this is where the money would actually go into. So when I closed the end of the year, we actually ended the year with $1.3 million in the undesignated fund balance. You'll see that there's a negative there of $174,000. What that is as of today, or as of September 30th, it's really that number. It's a negative, but it will swing into a positive. Right now, we're actually running at a negative because we haven't really received any revenues into CPC yet. We'll have our large commitment in December, when the tax bills go out. Right now, we just had a preliminary commitment for $500,000, so we've only received about $250,000 of that. We really haven't started seeing revenue coming in yet. So we're kind of in a deficit situation as of September 30th, but that'll swing to a positive, and that'll close out with additional money to add to the undesignated fund balance. The second thing spreadsheet that I put together is actually it's just a balance sheet. I thought if anybody, as financial people, they actually wanted to see what I would actually submit to the Department of Revenue, and this is the balance sheet. So the first part of the balance sheet is also your assets. So these are the cash that's in this fund. So that's the total assets are $2.4 million. Your liability is basically, it's your deferred revenue, is the revenue that we are expecting to collect, but we have not yet collected. And then you have your fund balances, and those are the pieces I was just talking about. The first 3 are the projects that are currently on the books. Then you have your reserve for expenditure and your undesignated fund balance. And then the last 3 buckets are the 10% buckets. So I take these fund balances into those 3 sections. And you can see the fund balance, what the fund balance totals is 2.1. Add that with your liability, it equals your assets. You have a balanced budget or balance sheet. And then the last thing I'd like to touch on is just on the debt, where we are with debt due with CPC. Again, like I spoke, we have the town halls, we have Sheehan Farm, Chelmsford Woods, the turf fields, and Varney Park. Later in the presentation, this meeting tonight, they'll be presenting the Roberts Field. What we've done here is we've showed you what the debt would look like for a $450,000 borrowing for 10 years. So it's the first year of the debt, if this was approved, would be in 2019, and would be for $63,000. You can see that The next few years, 19, 20, 21, the debt stays in the $600,000 range. After that, in 2022, it almost cuts in half. It goes down to $300,000 to $350,000. So when I've been meeting and presenting to the CPC, I've just been cautioned. There is some money in the funds, but if you drain it down for one project, and you adding more debt, you just don't have the capacity if you needed to take on another project, if a land acquisition or another deal came up. So I've always just told them to just be cautious when we go to bond counsel and they look at the debt ratio. Sometimes we've had some issues with CPC and borrowing, because all of the revenue that's coming in is basically the majority of the revenue we're collecting on a yearly basis is paying for the debt at this point. So we're really at a break-even point. So we're just a little cautious for the next couple of years until we pay off, and the reason why it drops down is we actually pay off the 2 town halls, and that will just free up some additional capacity to then borrow if other projects do come up. But I just think this would be I think this is a very good overview for everyone to kind of see where we are in this fund, and what it will look like if you're going to borrow for the playground. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. That concludes action under Article 1. We would now go on to the consent agenda, which are Articles 2, 4, and 5, and 12. At this point, they've been asked to be taken together. With the moderator's permission, I'll ask John Souza, our finance director, to give a quick overview of these 4 articles.
Good evening. Just to run through the articles on the consent agenda. The first is Article 2, E-rate. As we know from many of you longtime town meeting reps, this is a federal reimbursement for telecommunications and other technology items available to public schools. This year it's $35,035. If you're a longtime town meeting rep, you may be asking the question, the wording is a little different this year, and I'll just briefly explain that. In the past, the Mass Department of Revenue was always given the town guidance that it should be reserved in a special account, reserved for appropriation it's actually called, and then we would come here each October and ask you to appropriate it from that special account for expenditure by the school department. This year, the Department of Revenue has given us slightly different advice in that they've instructed the town accountant to deposit the monies received into a general fund account. So what happened is when the town accountant closes our books at the end of the fiscal year, the E-rate money then closed out to free cash, and so that's why we're asking this year to appropriate it from free cash to the school department. Just want to explain that. This just shows that the amount varies, as we know, by fiscal year. This year it's a little lower, it's down near 35. It depends truly on the amount of services and things that are purchased. Moving on to the next 2 articles in the consent agenda deal with the Stormwater Enterprise Fund that we spent a lot of time discussing last spring. The first, Article 4, what this does, you can see we're reducing the total appropriation to 0, and you might wonder, why is this necessary? When we last met about 6 months ago, town meeting voted to appropriate $1 million for personnel and expenses related to the Stormwater Fund. In communication with the Department of Revenue, we determined that we need a vote of this body so that we can reduce this to 0. This will allow Darlene, as our town accountant, when she submits the tax rate recap later this fall, she'll be able to show the original entry of $1 million, and then this is decreasing $1 million down to 0. So this is just really a technical change that's needed, that we need a vote of town meeting for. Article 5 is also related to the Stormwater Enterprise Fund, and what this does, I'm just going to forward to the slide. This is wording from what we voted on last spring under Article 5. when we voted to adopt our town budget to fund general government operations. And I won't read this to you, but you can see it lists all of the different revenue sources that go into to help pay for the general fund budget. And you'll see that there's an area about halfway down that's lined out. It's the $285,177 from stormwater user revenue. Because we're not going forward with stormwater operations, we will not have this source of revenue coming into the general fund budget. And what this is used for, just like we do with our sewer enterprise fund or our PEG access cable TV enterprise funds, is this offsets a portion of the employee benefit costs in the general fund budget. And I've had a couple of questions from town meeting reps, and I just want to explain the reason. Normally you would think you'd say, okay, John, we're decreasing revenue. Should we see a decrease in expenses? And the reason, there's really two reasons for this. The $285,000 is basically what it was offsetting was about $114,000 in health insurance costs and then about $171,000 towards our Middlesex pension assessment. The Middlesex pension assessment invoice that we receive each July 1st is actually calculated based on a prior valuation. What they do is they look back in early 2016, look at the number of retirees that we have and the number of active employees that we have, both in the town and non-teaching positions, and their actuary calculates an invoice. Because we're not going forward with the stormwater fund, our bill from Middlesex will not change, so we still need that same amount to pay Middlesex. The other portion is the health insurance, and although we have about $100,000 in reduced health insurance costs, and I'll take responsibility for this, I actually advised or recommended to our town manager that we not decrease the health insurance budget by $100,000 because $100,000 represents about 1% of our health insurance budget. And if you remember last town meeting, we had an increase in the number of both retirees and active employees, and we actually had to come back and ask for a supplemental appropriation. So to try to avoid that, I recommended that we keep that as a contingency for a health insurance budget. If it's not needed, it won't be spent, it'll be returned at the end of the fiscal year. And then finally, I won't fast forward to this article just to save time, but Article 12 relates to our Cemetery Commission, and it's a transfer of $25,000 from the sale of graves and lots account to the Cemeteries Improvement and Development Fund. And what this will be used to fund is continuing expansion and improvements at Pine Ridge Cemetery. If you've driven by Riverneck Road, you've probably seen some of the work going on there. So that's a brief overview of those four articles. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Souza. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation on those four articles?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Articles 2, 4, 5, and 12.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation on those articles?
Board of Selectmen voted 4-0 to recommend approval on all four articles. One member was absent the night that we made recommendations.
Does anyone have any questions or debate regarding any of those four articles? If not, we'll take a vote on the consent agenda. A vote yes is to approve all four articles. A vote no is to not approve them, and an abstention means that you are not voting either way. Well, I guess I was wrong. The articles passed, but not unanimously. 132 in favor, one no vote, and one abstention. So all four articles passed. Thank you.
Thank you,
Manager.
Mr. Farr. The next article is Article 3 on the warrant. We're requesting no action under Article 3, which would pertain to funding for collective bargaining agreements. At this time, we still have outstanding contract resolutions with the firefighters and the two police unions. Hopefully, we'll be back at a town meeting soon to bring those for consideration.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have any recommendation on Article 6?
Want to move to Article 6 now?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. What
Article 3, we were on 3 doing the...
Oh, I thought no recommendation.
Right, no action.
So we don't have to...
We'll now move to 6.
Yes, now we go to 6.
Okay, thank you.
You looked at me like you expected me to have them do something, and you threw me off there, Paul.
Thank you. Article 6 is a request for funding for an economic development position to serve the town of Chelmsford. As you may recall, during the past year, the town has made aggressive steps towards revitalizing its economic development activities, particularly in the 129 corridor, with the improvement of the updated 129 overlay bylaw, as well as this past spring, we were here at town meeting for the request for funding of $50,000 for a branding and marketing program for the community, which the Board of Selectmen, in fact, approved the procurement of that service earlier this evening prior to tonight's meeting. And if you remember the debate in the spring town meeting, it was very clear that they would be coming back at town meeting to take the next step in this process, which is to fund a position to serve the community on a full-time basis to enhance the town's revenue base and to remove it off of the reliance that we have had 80% on residential to increase our commercial availability in the community. During the past 6 months in spring town meeting, the Board of Selectmen has met as a newly constituted board after the town election. They established their goals for the upcoming fiscal year that we're now halfway through, and it was very clear that the Board of Selectmen prioritized economic development, and their goals and in my goals in serving under them was to create an economic development position to enhance our efforts as a community. That also involved collaboration with the Economic Development Committee in terms of developing what exactly should this position consist of and what should be the task, and there was agreement reached a few weeks back on the actual requirements and duties for the proposed position. So in essence, we're seeking to strengthen and enhance our economic development program, adding to our existing strategic programs such as the marketing, the efforts that go on a daily basis through my office with the assistance of Assistant Town Manager Mike McCall, Community Development Director Evan Belansky, the Board of Selectmen, the Community Development, the Chief Assessor Frank Green. We also bring in John Souza as Finance Director when needed. And basically we're seeking to bring forth another position which is dedicated to doing this on a day-to-day basis of being out there and retaining and expanding existing businesses in town, as well as attracting new companies to come and locate to Chelmsford. Many of you have seen some of this activity fairly recently. We're pleased to inform the community that DCU is occupying the former Kronos headquarters building on Billerica Road, and they'll be moving in after some minor renovations in the spring of 2018. And there's activities going on this week as we speak in terms of auctions over at Omni Way and also on River Neck Road at the former Mercury computer site. I can just tell you, in the 11 years that I've been here, it's an unprecedented level of economic activity going on, and it really derives, I believe, from the status of the economy, but also more importantly, and I think essentially from the rezoning that was approved last fall and became effective at the first of this past calendar year, about 9-10 months ago. The new position is not new in the industry. We have towns such as Billerica and Bedford and Reading who have these dedicated economic development positions in addition to the planning staff inside the communities. This position would report directly to the town manager, so they would be a direct report to me in terms of the activities that are going on, and then periodically we would update the Board of Selectmen as to the status and progress that is being made. It's really, again, a continuation of the town's commitment to economic development. And the title will be Director of Business Development. Again, the keys here are attraction, retention, and outreach. and dealing with the internal stakeholders of the community, as well as the external market that's out there. And you can imagine there'll be a lot of time outside of the building attending industry networking events, and being a presence and an ambassador for the town of Chelmsford and really we're asking your funding. And the question is, well, why are you only seeking a total of $50,000? Well, we believe that if approval is granted here this evening, by the time we go through the advertisement and hiring process, that this person would start after the first of the calendar year. So basically, we'll be funding the 50% of the total annual cost for the balance of this fiscal year, roughly, depending upon the rate of hire in terms of the compensation level. We've got it graded as a grade 7 position, so you've got a starting salary of anywhere between $80,000 to $100,000, and then we would then prepare in the budget that would come to you next spring town meeting for the full operating budget of the community for the full fiscal year. In that case, it would be fiscal year 19. We'd have the entire direct costs, which would be over $100,000 for the position, and then obviously you have indirect costs such as benefits and so forth that would be absorbed into the town's operating budget. So that is an overview of what we're seeking, and again, we seek your support to enhance the efforts of the town of Chelmsford, because as you know, out there it's a very competitive market, it's a very dynamic market, and we really want to be at the forefront in order to provide jobs, provide benefit to our community, and more importantly, expand our commercial tax base beyond the historic 20%. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Okay. Now does the Finance Committee have any recommendation on Article 6?
A majority of the Finance Committee recommends approval of Article 6.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation regarding Article 6.
Board of Selectmen recommended approval 4-0.
Thank you. We will now enter the question and answer and discussion portion of the meeting.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 5, through you, Mr. Moderator, to the town manager. We've done pretty well without a business development position currently, and I appreciate the good news that you've brought to us. And as I look at the things that you've posted here, I see what looks like to me a lot of activity. Attend meetings, meet people, go to networking events, and so forth. So I am most interested, if this is a permanent position, sounds like it is, how you measure the success of somebody that's designed to be a business development director. In other words, you know, we're where we are now with the certain vacancy rates we have plans for the Route 128 corridor. So what is it that you are looking for at the end of a year, 2 years, 5 years from a development director to know whether or not that position has panned out and brought the town what we have invested in?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I don't know that you can measure it. Quite frankly, it's the but-for question. In other words, if you have the position, how do you measure what was attributed by that position versus what would have happened but for that position? Because as I noted, had the position been hired 6 months ago, could we have attributed the DCU location to the town of Chelmsford? We don't know. We know DCU came with our existing staff. We know that we need a person out there because part of it is it's a perception and marketing program. And I think the Board of Selectmen shares the opinion. We probably won't know the value of this program for at least 5+ years out in terms of the networking, the contacts, and the environment in which it takes place. I don't think you can give that fair measure in terms of, well, would you know because your commercial vacancy went down by 3%. A lot of that is market driven. As we know, it's driven by the economy. I mean, look, as I mentioned earlier, look what's happened to the town's affordable housing supply. Many in this room, including myself, thought the town would have a real difficult time ever achieving 10% affordable housing, that it was one of those elusive goals we would never be able to obtain, and we'd always be suffering the impacts of 40B projects. And what happened? The market changed. And what happened in the market now is we have a market which is now rental, apartment driven, which is basically would double the amount of rental housing stock in the community. And why that mattered there was when rental projects, as opposed to condo or ownership models, on a rental project, 100% of the units count. So therefore, we'll be achieving 10% of affordable housing without any additional position or without really effort by the town to say, oh yes, we undertook X, Y, and Z, which is why we got to the 10%, although we took measures along the way, such as an update to the town's affordable housing master plan and so forth. I think the same thing can be said to this. What is, how will you know? You'll never be able to really know. I think, however, what you do know is that this is an essential position if the town wants to continue to be viewed as a credible location for business retention and location into the community, because this person will be out there selling the community on a day-to-day basis, making the contacts, which quite frankly, myself, Mike McCall, Evan Belansky, as professionals for the town on a day-to-day basis, we don't have the time to devote to do that as extensively as we'd want to do as a community, clearly as extensively the Board of Selectmen is seeking to see as a community, and therefore what this is going to do is it's going to give us another resource at the table who's going to be, his primary mission and skill set is to do this on a day-to-day basis. So to answer your question, Glenn, I can't give you a metric. But I can tell you is it's a vehicle to achieve what I believe we're seeking to achieve, which is to enhance our commercial base and also be competitive with other communities that are out there who are initiating the same efforts in terms of, and I mentioned some of them. They're out there in Bedford, they're out there in Billerica. A town like Burlington doesn't have a position because you know why? They don't need such a position because of the location of the town of Burlington and the amenities that are in the town of Burlington. We have a huge undertaking in Chelmsford. We're starting at a disadvantage, which has been addressed by our zoning bylaws, that we don't have the amenities in our commercial corridor. So we are going to have to be aggressive in terms of businesses to come in on that initial wave to get those amenities in, and we need a person out there selling Chelmsford and doing this initiative, and therefore that's why the board and I and the support of the Finance Committee are recommending this position, because we think it's crucial to reach our potential as a community.
I understand the distinction you made between housing, because we have the land and the ability to put in, large amounts of housing in town, whether we like it or not. That's a different situation than what you're indicating here, and that's why I wanted to understand the metrics a little bit better, because being busy is not the same as getting something done. People in the defense industry where I am can be busy and never finish anything. They cannot bring in new contracts. They don't add to the value of the organization. But that's what I wanted to make the distinction here. Being busy for me is not enough. You have to be able to say that, look, I expect that person to go out and make the contacts, start the discussion, sell the town, and bring in the business that's going to occupy a building, tear down a building and build a new building. So in the job description, it isn't something I'd look to see about being busy, but rather this is what I want to have accomplished. I want to see the buildings built out on 129. I have a new plan for that. So I'm a little bit uncomfortable in that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what he's going to do. Something might happen. Something's already happened. But, I'd feel more comfortable if there was a set of objectives that were based around our master plan that said this person is expected to bring in and will be measured by whether they bring in businesses to occupy space or transform 129. That's the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator.
Can you speak into the microphone, please?
I'm trying. I'm sorry.
That's much better.
I'm height limited. Through you to the town manager. I think this is a simple question, but because of my activity in planning board, commercial and industrial are two different things. So my question is, this warrant article says the position is to create and retain a vibrant commercial environment within the town. Does this really mean commercial and industrial?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Paul Regazio, Precinct 7. Just one simple question and a follow-up. Who will this individual report to within the town?
I believe it's noted on the slide. The person will report to me as town manager.
Okay, I apologize.
It's my hire, and the person would report directly to me. The person will not oversee any employees, so it's not a department head. It's an agent for the town.
The other question is, what footprint does DCU take on the 129 area? And were there any special deals, in getting DCU to come to Chelmsford?
They took the Kronos-owned headquarters on the Alpha Road side of 129. You also may be aware Kronos also leased space on the Town Hall side of 129, as well as space back on Omni Way. They took that headquarters building at the corner. There were no tax incentives or other financial relief provided to bring DCU into the community.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Chris Bowman, 3 Julio Street, Precinct 4. And I have a question. You said that a similar position exists in Billerica, Bedford, and Reading.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering, is there a similar position in Westford?
No.
That you know of?
Westford does not have a position.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is that Westford does not seem to have any difficulty keeping its commercial buildings filled. So I don't really understand why Chelmsford is having difficulties in that area. And last meeting, I did ask if anybody from Chelmsford is looking to their Westford counterparts to get any suggestions, recommendations, something that would help the town that Westford is successfil in, that could help us achieve the same thing.
Is that a question? Yeah, the question is we've had discussions. In fact, members of the Board of Selectmen, Ken Lefebvre and Glenn Diggs, went and they met with officials from Nashua, they met with officials from Billerica and other communities to discover and discuss what efforts are taking place in those communities. The difference in Westford is, I described earlier, they have amenities. They have Burton's, they have the 99 Grill, and all in their commercial and industrial corridor on the 110 network. When you go down 129, we don't have that. We now have the zoning in place, but that's the key. So if you're a business and say, I'm going to locate 100,000 square feet of leased space, where am I going to go to? If you take a drive onto 110 in Westford by Red Hat and so forth, you can say, okay, this is great. My employees can work here. At lunchtime, they can go walk over to the 99 or within a few moments be over at the Westford Cornerstone Plaza and so forth. If you're in Chelmsford and you go out to Apollo Drive in that area, you see nothing for them to go to. And this is why we instituted that zoning change. There are no amenities out there. We are going to have to be aggressive and go that extra mile with an employee as well as incentives. I fully expect we'll be back here at town meeting asking for tax relief for the early arrivers in order to incentivize them to come into the community to make this work. That is the distinction. We are basically starting at a disadvantage point because of the fact that Westford developed at a later date with us and had those amenities in place. We had the traditional 1980 zoning, of which you separated office parks from residential, from retail and so forth. Now it's the live, work, play model, the same model that you see all the people going into Boston to live because they don't need a car, they can live, work, go to fitness centers and so forth, all within in fact, sometimes they're in the same building. You have the restaurants now in the residential buildings and the gyms and so forth. We don't have that. That's why, as I said, the town of Burlington doesn't need to do that. They had done their zoning change 7 or 8 years ago, and within the last couple of years, we've seen the transformation there with the efforts they've taken. This is our way of catching up, quite frankly. And as I said, it's not going to happen overnight. It will be at least a 5 or 10 year process to where we can get comfortable moving forward.
I appreciate what you're saying. However, another difference between Westford on 110 and 129 is that the traffic on 110 in Westford is tremendous. There's a lot of traffic on 110, so and not as much on 129. So as far as time for people to get from where they work to restaurants or whatever is going to be at least 5 to 10 minutes, which is no different from people on 129 to what exists now in Chelmsford that's available to them. So the only thing I would suggest is that maybe with the existing community development director position, there could be some prioritization given to the commercial aspects to try to fill the vacant commercial buildings instead of a separate position. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Elaine McDonald, Precinct 1, to you, moderator, to the town manager. I have two questions. Incentivize, I find that an interesting term, but since amenities seem to be one of the gating factors, will amenities be incentivized as much as an employer, like at a restaurant? That's in the plan?
Again, I'm not going to publicly discuss what the town's offerings would be, because we'll have to see how those unfold, but I would not rule that out. We have to get some amenities in there to break through the current status quo. So depending upon what is proposed, and we've had some proposals that have come in and we've met with folks ranging from hotels to restaurants to plazas, that may be part of the equation, yes. That may be necessary for the early ones. No, not saying everyone, but it may be something we may have to take at the early stage of the process in order to get us to a place where we can have footing where we don't no longer have to utilize that any kind of incentives to attract companies to come into the community. But right now we've got a problem. We are not competitive with other communities on the Route 3 and 495 corridor who have a more attractive workplace for young employees. Everybody's looking for young millennial talent, and I know we're all tired of hearing about it, but that is what they're looking for. And whether you're seeking to attract Amazon, and those type of dreams, or you're trying to attract the next, startup company, they're looking to be able to incentivize a place where they can get talent to want to work and also hopefully live and come to work in those areas. And that is the challenge that's out there right now. And as I say, we're starting a step back from other communities.
So you're saying you'd be open to a tri-model where it's amenities, housing, employers?
Which is what our bylaw permits.
Okay. Could I ask, Mr. Speaker, the town manager, can you give me like 5 bullet points of what you would put on the job ad for this person?
What I would put on the job?
Searching for must have.
Well, I must have experience. We're looking for somebody who has experience in economic development. It's a little different skill set than just a straight planner. You get somebody who has experience working in the industry in terms of retention efforts. Most likely, hopefully, somebody who's worked with a smaller community. We may be that midpoint bridge in terms of a person who's worked in a smaller town in economic development activities who wants to go to a mid-sized community, suburban community, and perhaps if they excel here, they're going to a large metropolitan area to further their ambitions. So you've got to look for somebody with experience, look at somebody with the skill set, certainly at minimum an undergraduate degree in a related field, and an advanced degree would be preferred. We're looking for the personality. In essence, part of it is a sales approach as well, in terms of the ability to make contact with people and make repeated contact and inquiries to bring them into the community. So those are the type of efforts that we're looking for in a person in terms of their skill set to come into our position.
So you're kind of saying somebody mid-range using us for a couple of years as they go off to better and better things because they will have us successful and have successfully helped us.
That may be the case. I don't think you can rule that out. Okay. I mean, if you want to have somebody who's aggressive and cutting edge, then their ambitions may be greater than Chelmsford, and this may be a way, to get some benefit for us in a 3 to 5 year window. But again, obviously we'd hope to retain somebody who'd stay here, for a long time, and we generally have had that type of employment record with the community. But I wouldn't rule out the fact that you may have somebody who's quite talented, and who may be that successful that their dreams are to go work for the city of Cambridge eventually, or such. we have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Frances McDougall, Precinct 1, 129 corridor dweller. I live off of Golden Cove, so this is very personal to me. We're talking about what is it we're looking for in a person who would be a good fit for this position. Now, a while ago, when Amazon first came up, I grabbed on that right away and put it out to everybody. Boy, this would be something for this area of town to look at. I know it was a pie in the sky, but we have the 495, the 3, and the land. And I thought, well, why don't we look into it? What amazed me was that nobody knew what I was talking about. No one was aware of the story, this was a while ago, of Amazon looking for that. And of course, they're still looking in Boston and everywhere. So the first thing I would like to know about the person who's being interviewed for this position is, what do they know? What is it they know? What background do they have? Not just someone who wants to work in this type of job for a certain salary. I want someone who is aware of the economy, of all of that. I'm losing some of my words since my little episode, so if I go off track, I'm sorry.
I'll keep you on track.
Thank you. So, and I don't like individuals who come into the town and change the whole structure of the town in one instant, and I can talk about that. I can talk about tractor trailers in town. Tractor trailers were not allowed in our town in this corridor until an individual selling trees decided he wanted tractor trailers.
Okay, now you're getting off point.
What I'm talking about is how we plan for this 129 area, and it has to be on point as to how we handle it.
Fran,
We
with
need
all due
someone
respect,
planning this.
with all due respect, the point...
I hope you do respect me, sir.
I do, and that's why I'm saying with all due respect. The real issue is, are we going to appropriate funds, and do you have the confidence in the town manager, if we do appropriate the funds, that he will hire the person who's going to do what needs to be done?
Of course,
Okay.
I have confidence in
Well, that's...
Paul.
but we're-
However, what are the questions? That's the point on this interviewing process. If we are going to, what are we going to ask them? It's a new episode in our history of this particular job, and I just want to make sure that the questions that are asked are apropos for this corridor.
I am sure that if you want to talk to the town manager privately about tractor trailers, he will be more than happy to discuss that with
He
you.
wants to talk right now.
Ms. Meyer, if I may, here's the concern that I have. First of all, one person is not going to be transformative. Let me explain this. The person will work for the town manager, will work for me. They're not an independent agent or actor who's going to have autonomy. As we know, in order to achieve anything in the 129 corridor or type of development, you're going to need the cooperation and support of the planning board, an elected board in the community who's going to review site plan and applications. So therefore, the planning board's a critical role. You also have to have the support of the Board of Selectmen on a project, especially if it involves any kind of tax incentives or other incentives to bring a firm in. The Board of Selectmen are going to have to weigh in. And also, it just involves the fit in the corridor. So what my concern is that anything that goes right will be overly exaggerated to the position, and what goes wrong may be written off as, well, you know, that's a circumstance. It's no different than being the manager of the Boston Red Sox. You get too much credit when it succeeds.
Wait a minute, don't rub it in.
And too much blame when it fails. And that's something I know you can relate to, Fran. You know. but that is the nature of the position in that it's part of the team. It's a team effort. The rest of us aren't going to go away. I can assure you, and it goes to an earlier comment from a previous speaker, our number one priority in the town offices on a day-to-day basis is the economic development and vitality of this community, along with the residential balance of life and quality of life in this town. And therefore, if a project or an interest comes in, we find room on our calendars, and we will continue to do that with this new person on board. If you may recall, Fran, particularly, there was a time about 7 or 8 years ago where I was vilified for selling the town out for economic development. And now somehow it's all come around the other way, where our priority is economic development. It's funny how time in the world works, but the bottom line is our priority is very clear because the directive is clear from the Board of Selectmen. It's all about economic development. It's all about bringing this position on board to sell Chelmsford, to bring people who perhaps otherwise may not be aware or be interested in coming to our community. And therefore, the key part is it's the reputation of the community. And that's what drives it. Right now, we have a successful track record that if people come in, they get a quick answer. May not be the answer they want, but they're going to get an expedited answer, usually within 90 days, on their particular project. And they are meeting with officials such as the fire chief, the building inspector, myself, the assessor, in advance of those board hearings so that they go in prepared and know what they're going into. So I'm confident that we do have a professional and a competent administration.
I agree.
And what we're seeking is this position to add to our team. It's not going to be an independent agent who by him or herself is going to transform the community.
But someone with a vision.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Fran.
Clarity, in previous town meetings, we've had question and answer sessions, debate sessions. Is this question and answer session that we're having now also a debate session where we can express our opinion on this particular article? Have we merged those into one?
Yes, that was voted on by this board, that we are merging discussion with question and answer.
Yes, good, because I haven't heard anybody say what they want to do with this article yet. So in case a town manager might be of the opinion that I, want to defeat this, I absolutely do not want to defeat this, because I want to have essentially one person, not a bunch of people with a little piece of their activities all focusing towards economic development. I would like to have one person who's responsible for handling that mission, who would draw on these other people instead of someone like sitting here trying to find out where all the pieces come together. So, all I want to say at this particular standing is to support this article. And of course, there will be some issues on what is the person's mission and how do you measure that mission. Is it the mission to create the 129 corridor that we have talked about for so many times, to put the amenities in place, to put the opportunity to build larger buildings that might house an Amazon or a Microsoft or whoever it is in place, to have that in the structure of the position. So just so that town meeting knows, and the town manager as well, I strongly support this position if it is created so that the vision that we have established for the town is the mission of the economic development position. I agree that there'll be a lot of activity for this person, but I'd also like to have the person understand very well what we want that to look like when we are done. That there are buildings that accommodate new industry, there are buildings that accommodate young people and young engineers and young accountants and young bankers, and they have a place to go for lunch, they have a place to take their laundry, they have a pharmacy nearby that makes it an attractive location. We can't do any better than having Route 3 next to Route 495. This is the ideal location. So I want to strongly support this economic development position, and if we no longer need it, we'll erase it. If we're all developed and everything is great, 5 years, 10 years from now, it'll disappear. Or if the person is clearly not doing the job, the town manager will come and say, or perhaps tell the person already, your services are no longer needed, we need another person. So I urge you to vote in favor of this position.
Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. We're in debate, to be clear. So the whole idea of that is to try to give you an idea of why to vote or not vote for this. When I look at this figure that was given to us, I see $40,000 and $10,000 in expenses. The true number includes health care. The true number includes doubling that because that's only half a year. The true number is an employee is an expense that walks in here on two legs. That was told to us by a German in my company a few years back. And the true number is that person won't go away for the next 10 years. So we're voting on $1.2 million, about $120,000 a year for somebody to be here for about 10 years. I'd suggest that since we're kind of creeping into this marketing stuff for the town, maybe we should hire a marketing firm for the next couple of years, maybe 5 years, give them a 5-year project for $500,000. That's what we're voting for here, to hire an employee that's going to have an office in here and work for the town, arguably, with a bunch of experts. I have a town manager that's second to none. I have a new assistant town manager. I have an urban developer who's changed my community on my side of town. And in fact, we're about to build 200 units on some space that was just taken up by a bunch of trees. I mean, goodness sakes, 200 units in less than 6 months down the street from me. We even have the gas company run a line down Turnpike Road, Jesse Road, Yancey Road. Those things have been leaking for the last 4 or 5 years. Now, if all that can be done without hiring this person, and all we really need to do is market, we have people in town that do some pretty good marketing. This guy's doing marketing. Anybody can see that picture? He's doing marketing in Andover, making a fortune for free. Well, he's a developer. This is what people do when they look at an economic idea. And when we rezoned that whole section between Turnpike and Route 3, we gave a whole bunch of developers a great idea. I'm not sure that we should hire an individual, one person. I think we should hire a firm, again, for $500,000 with a 5-year plan to market our town. And the nice thing about that is after 5 years, you can fire them. Or if they don't perform in 1 year, you can let them go. I don't know if any town employees' positions that we've eliminated in the last 30 years I've been here, except for economic reasons where we couldn't afford them anymore. And when we could afford them, we hired most of them back. So I'm going to vote no on this because I see $120,000 up there, not 50, and I see $1.2 million over the next 10 years. That's what we're voting on, $1.2 million for the next 10 years. Great idea to market the town, but I think we have the talent in town up in the front and in this community here, 162 people that spend their evenings 3 or 4 or 5 nights out of the year in here that have a whole lot of expertise and will market our town for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Chris Garahan, Precinct 8. I'm opposed to this article. I certainly fully support economic development, but I would suggest that we need to continue the collaborative approach of using our selectmen, our town management, the planning board, and perhaps enhancing what we're doing now with the use of a consultant, a third-party consultant, but to try that approach on an interim basis for the next year or two, leverage what we're doing on a collaborative basis and see how that works before we take the step of going with a full-time permanent position. So that's my suggestion, is let's look at a couple of other alternatives before we take this step. So for that reason, I'm opposed to this article at this point in time.
Thank you.
Joe Reddy, Precinct 1, also Vice Chairman of the Economic Development Commission. I want to speak in favor of this particular position. I think it's a much-needed position. To go back to some of the previous speakers, we have worked in a collaborative setting over the past, good eight or so years with the Board of Selectmen, the Economic Development Commission, the town manager, Evan Belansky, to try to bring businesses into the town. We have quite a few people on the Economic Development Commission that are very bright. They have a lot of talent. They understand the economic landscape, and we've done a great job of trying to bring it all together, I think, to this point. But really, I think why this position is so needed is we need somebody that can come in and create market demand. And I think, Glenn had asked the question of what are the kind of the measurables, and some of the things that were brought up when we were talking about hiring for this position was specifically somebody that can bridge the gap between both developers, commercial real estate professionals, other real estate professionals to try to create that market demand and explain to outsiders and to developers about zoning, about what kind of zoning that we have, because it's a very competitive market. Developers can go to Nashua, they can go to Groton, they can go to Westford, they can go anywhere, and it can be out of state as well. They need to know specifically what's happening here, because just because we've rezoned the 129 area doesn't mean that a developer all of a sudden understands the economic advantages that exist within our community. So, you know, having somebody that's dedicated full-time to trying to make those efforts happen is important for our town. And long after that 129 area is redeveloped and created into hopefully what we all consider to be a win-win for the town, business retention is really, I think, really the most important thing. And I wish back in 2008 we had this position, because we may have been able to retain a lot of the businesses that had left. We may have understood better about Goodrich and some of the businesses that were having struggles, and we may have been able to better retain them. So, you know, this position, while it's hard to necessarily measure specifically the performance, I think some of maybe the Board of Selectmen, when they speak, can speak to the value that I think that this position truly would bring to the town. And I do think from taxpayers' perspective, we're going to see a huge value from it. And to speak to the marketing piece of it, we've just spent about what will be about $50,000 coming forward. We put out RFPs to have materials created. I don't want them to collect dust. I want somebody that's going to pick them up, bring them out to the community, bring them out to developers and commercial real estate people, and make those particular pieces work for our town. So I would hope that you support this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken Lefebvre, Chelmsford Board of Selectmen. So for the last 6 months, I've spent a lot of my time. One of the first things I did in working with economic development and Glenn and Paul was trying to get to know and understand really what was going on in the town as far as economic development. And I've been fortunate enough to sit in with a lot of the landowners, talk to some of the commercial real estate brokers. I've also met with some of the other community development and economic development positions from other towns. And the one thing, or a few things that I learned from this, were that all the other towns around us, up and down 485, whether it's Marlborough up to Nashua, Tewksbury, Billerica, they're all taking the same approach. And we're going to be left behind if we don't get someone qualified in to sort of compete on that level. Some of the questions that were asked tonight, I think, were excellent questions, but we're definitely in a different position than Westford. They had a lot of open land. We have a lot of small pieces of land owned by a bunch of different landowners. And one of the big things that I think this person can do is, you know, as Brian had said, we have projects coming into town, and we really don't have any control or direction over that. There's nobody out there sort of making the case for us on what we want. There's no what I want to do, and the project comes to us. We may not like it, but if they own the land, you know, there's some limits there. And so what I'm hoping is that we get someone more proactive who says, what do we want? And goes out and spurs the interest on what we want, so we can develop 129 and other areas of the town to be what we want Chelmsford. That's my hope of what this position can do. So I'd ask you to support the position. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Diggs, Board of Selectmen. I think you need to step back from looking at this as a strictly 129 initiative. It's a town-wide initiative. It's a way of looking at business in a different way. You know, thus far we have a team in place who devote a certain amount of their time to we're talking about the town has a set amount of available space and available buildings for economic development uses. They are probably, if you look at what we have, it's vastly underused compared to what many other towns have. We have a group of people who have many titles, many duties, such as the town manager, economic development, the planning board, the board of selectmen, so forth. But we don't give any time, really, to looking for a vision, looking for a situation that someone is going out and when someone says no, the person who would be in this position would never hear no. They would just hear and back. They were trying to be finding out what is really on this person's mind. How can I parlay this little idea into a much bigger idea? And that's what their goal is. Someone mentioned kind of what are their credentials coming into the job. One of them is that they need to know the state inside and out as far as what's available for grant money, for what they can bring to the table. With this company coming to Chelmsford or going somewhere else, maybe they have that one stick that another town doesn't offer. You know, in the investigation for a person coming in like this, you know, we heard story after story about towns that wanted to change the climate, and they hired a person who had the time to do this. Economic development is a discipline all by itself. It's like engineering or anything else. It's a relatively new field. There are not that many people in it. I mean, you'll hear about, let's say, the economic development director for Cambridge or Boston. All right, but coming out to a town like this, there are fewer and fewer towns that have those positions. Not that they don't want them, but there are a limited amount of qualified people to take those positions. Yes, Chelmsford is a kind of middle-of-the-road situation, and we really need to tap into someone who has some experience in this field. But maybe they will be here for 20 years. Maybe they'll be here for 5 years. But the idea is that for whatever time they spend here, their time is productive, and they bring in money. You know, we come to town meeting, we talk a lot about spending money. Well, there's an adage that's been going around for a long time in that you have to spend money to make money. You know, the town has, you'll hear that the town has always being hit with new mandates by the state. Of course, the state doesn't provide any capital for those mandates. They just tell you, here's another mandate, like stormwater, and there are many others. You have situations where we're hit with double-digit inflation on medical payments that have to be paid to town people and to retirees. Where's all that money coming from? You have situations with the school system that want to have a new facility. Where's the money coming from that? You know, the town of Chelmsford has a certain image that we like it to be, you know, quaint, you know, relatively quiet, and so forth and so on. And there are some warrant articles which address that in one way or another. The question is, if you want Chelmsford to be the way it is, for the most part, something has to change because somehow we have to pay for it. You know, the town has been very efficient. The school department is very efficient. The town manager and the various departments that we rely efficiently. But sooner or later, the money is running additional monies. And having underutilized to bear to increase the revenue in the town from the commercial side will be helpful. It also, if it's successful, will help with the property value. To change. And he had 43 people in his department. Now he has 9. Doing the same work. And it's already in place that just doesn't have time to do this. And as they're successful, they will bring more and more business to town, which will mean that the planning board will be doing more duty than they do now, just dealing with projects. You know, the projects that we have in place, in some ways you could consider them as things that have come to us. Those are the apples low on the branches. But where are the real bright, the big apples. They are not on the bottom branches. They are at the top of the tree, and it takes work to get them. So I urge you to have, vision for the town and to support this measure. Yes. Will it be the 40,000 plus 10? No, it will not be. That's just a half a year. It will be more like $120,000. But if that person is up to the task, that is a small amount in terms of the revenue that he's going to create for this town in perpetuity. And that's what we need to look at. That's what it's about. It's not about the here and now. It's about what you want for the future generations of this town. And I urge you to vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleen Stansfield, Precinct 1. I'd like to say he or she would make a good community development position. I honestly just disagree a little bit with the previous two speakers. I think that this town does have a vision, and I think the planning board has done a phenomenal job, and it's earmarked in the zoning changes that we've done over the past several years that have led up to this 129 change, which has sort of catalyzed this into the public eye. Now, economic development has also done a fabulous job. I think that the working group together, as it stands, has connections that somebody new is just not going to have. They're not going to have it right away. I really think this is premature to do this as a full-time hire. I think that what I expected at town meeting was to have economic development come back and ask for a certain amount of money that would go towards a contract person. And then we could see where it went from there. And then we could move in to this question. But as it stands right now, I don't support this because I think the team we have is great. And I don't think we need to spend this kind of money at this point. The ink isn't even dry on the bylaw. And when they started discussing it, it was 6 months ago. So I don't support this. I support the people that endeavor to do the economic development in this town, and I think we have a lot of great things in place, and I think we can come back and visit this in another 6 months.
Thank you.
Nancy Arroway, Precinct 1. I'd like to move the article.
We have a motion to move the question. This would terminate debate. We will vote on that. There is no debate on that motion. It requires a 2/3 vote in order to pass. If this motion passes, we will then move to vote on the article itself. Please vote now. Position. The article passes 100 in favor, 36 opposed, 2 abstentions. Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 7 is a request to seek a appropriation to purchase the Chelmsford Forum. Chapter 141 of the Acts of 1998 authorized the State Department of Capital Asset Management and Operations at the time to enter into a 20-year lease with the town of Chelmsford for the management and operation of the Chelmsford Forum. That agreement expires next June 30th. So in less than a year, we have to take action. We are asking that you to take action at this time to purchase the Forum. Under that special legislation, the town of Chelmsford was granted the option to purchase the property for the appraised value, less the cost of capital improvements, alterations and renovations that were made by the town into that property during this period, 20-year period. And I'm here to report this evening that the town conducted an appraisal. The appraised value came back at $2.7 million for the property. The appraisal was accepted by the Massachusetts Inspector General's office. We've also submitted to them the capital improvements that have gone into the facility. Most of them were in recent years, and those total over $1.5 million. And therefore, that would bring the net purchase price for this $2.7 million asset to just under $1.2 million. Let me explain to you what we've done in the facility through town meeting votes for approval. You can see it goes back to '99, where a dehumidifier system was put in, to condenser units and evaporators. We replaced the entire ice slab 8 years ago. We also put in the ice rink boards, or the dashers, at that same time. So again, it was over a $500,000 investment in 2009, followed by a $200,000 investment to replace the roof of the facility, new scoreboard. We resurfaced the parking lot, the doors, LED lighting, and structural repairs that came to town meeting back in the spring because the inspection that we did, because we wanted to make sure the building was structurally sound. We saw some work that had occurred prior to the town's occupancy of the building had compromised the support beams and the exterior. That work has now been completed. So it's a tremendous asset. What is the town acquiring? We're acquiring 15 acres of land located at the Route 129 interchange with Route 3. 8 of those acres are in Chelmsford. That's generally the land to the back of the Forum, as well as where the buses are parked. And then there's 7 acres in the town of Billerica, which includes the building itself and the area towards Brick Hill Road, intersection there with Chelmsford Road and Billerica. The only strings that come along with the purchase that carry into the deed carry from the original legislation, and that provides that the UMass Lowell may practice up to 5 times per month free of charge during the hockey season. And also, nonprofit youth programs would have the right to continue to secure ice time at the rink. As we sit here this evening, in fact, Chelmsford Youth Hockey is in the facility tonight using ice time that goes till 10 o'clock, and then at 10 o'clock there's 2 hours of adult men's hockey usage for the Forum. The building is in utilization roughly from September through June. And again, it's most busy, as you can imagine, in the afternoon, evening hours. However, as you can imagine, on the weekends, there's early morning and other activities that take place. In terms of the asset itself, as I mentioned, the 7 acres of the property and building are located in Billerica. The town of Billerica assesses this building at 1.9 in land at $1,989,700. So we will be subject, as a community that holds land in another community, will be subject to their commercial tax rate, which is 33.44. At their split tax rate. So we will have to make a tax payment to the town of Billerica. Right now, we pay a $10,000 payment in lieu of taxes under that special legislation. But clearly, this provides an asset that is used by Chelmsford High School. It's used by the students at Neshoba Tech for their hockey program. It's used by Lowell Catholic. It's used by the youth programs. It's used for public skating and other developmental programs that are offered by the facility operator. Since the town's inception at this lease back in '98, the facility has been run by a private management company. Procurement contracts go out every 5 years. That will continue. The current procurement contract expires June 30th, 2018, because we made it coterminous with the legislation and lease period. If this is approved, we would move forward with the closing on the property, perhaps by the end of the calendar year, and also at that time we would issue a new RFP for the management of the Forum going forward. How these improvements were achieved was under that special legislation. 35% of the revenues from the operations of the facility would go into a maintenance fund. The latest audit report on the activities of the facility, there's roughly over $700,000 in revenue from the use of the facility during the calendar year. We would come to you in town meeting in the spring, establish another enterprise fund where, again, the revenues from the forum's activities would be separate, much like the golf course has successfully operated separately, much like we do with the sewer enterprise fund, and therefore would be accounted for separately, it would be tracked, and therefore from those monies and balances, similar to PEG Access, we now do as well. From those money and balances, we would apply towards the debt service for the building. We would pay for it over a 10-year period. We would apply the $1 million that was borrowed, as John Souza explained earlier this evening, for the stormwater capital works, which is obviously not being utilized. We would revoke that debt under this motion to apply the $1 million towards the acquisition. We'd borrow the remaining $200,000. The good news is the money we borrowed back in June for the stormwater has a better interest rate than if we were going to the market right now because rates have crept a little higher in the past few months with the Fed's actions. The good news is this is a secure asset for the community. If we were to lose this asset, then the community would have to find some future space to meet the needs that I described for the high school and other programs. And the other thing is with these improvements over the facility, we're acquiring a building that was constructed in 1964, but yet is in excellent condition because we've done all the infrastructure in the building, as you said, from the roof to the ice surface to the locker rooms to the scoreboard to the lighting and so forth. So the building is sound. Again, we'll continue to manage it under a private management operation with revenue coming into the town into a secure fund that would go to offset the costs of the forum. So I appreciate your attention to this article and ask for your support to secure this asset and amenity for the town of Chelmsford. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 7.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation.
Board of Selectmen voted 4-0 to recommend approval.
Okay, now is question and answer and discussion.
Claire Janot, Precinct 7, a question. Can you just give us a sense of, I know that's a nice long list of what we've done for improvements to maintain the building, but what do you anticipate in the next 5 to 10 years in terms of what might affect our own capital plan once we acquire this, if it's so passed?
And I don't see anything in the next 5 years. One of the reasons we've done this work, as you noted, it's backloaded towards 14, 15, 17. We saw this day coming. So we basically said, look, every dollar we spend on capital improvements is a dollar less that we're going to have to spend to secure to pay for the building. So we've aggressively gone up front in terms of doing whatever we could, knowing that this day was coming. In speaking with Gary Prescatti, our facilities director, again, we had a structural analysis of the building. The building is sound. The next work that you're going to see over there will be the pavement and paving of the parking lot areas. That will require permits from the town of Billerica because there are wetland issues and so forth, and the land is in Billerica. But that's the next thing you'll see over there. But beyond that, we don't see anything for five years. On a 10-year horizon, you're probably going more towards some of the items that depreciate over time, looking at the doors, looking at the lavatories, and so forth. But the main components, which are the ice surface and the components of itself of the forum that holds 3,500 people, are sound. So we really don't foresee any anticipate. And there's a good reason for that because, again, if the asset only, brings in $700,000 in revenue per year, and we're borrowing $1.2 million over a 10-year period, we're going to need the revenue coming in to pay the note on the facility and the taxes to the town of Billerica going forward. So we don't anticipate any significant improvements to that building because if they were there, it would have been shame on us for not doing them by now.
Thank you. And so just to confirm then, you're telling me that, or us, that
yes,
the debt service for this will come out of the enterprise fund that's created and be fully funded by the operation?
That is our intent. Yeah,
Okay, thank
basically
you.
that's our intent.
Mary France, Precinct 6, and maybe you've been answering this question already, but I wondered how the debt service and the taxes to Billerica compare with whatever we're paying now in terms of the pilot payment and the current lease. We currently pay a lease payment to the state, is that correct?
No, we have no lease payment to the state. So the good news is we had no lease payment to the state.
So
the payment in lieu of taxes to the town of Billerica under the legislation was $10,000 per year, because if something happens on the site, whether it's police activity, fire, and so forth, that the Billerica responds because the building itself and most of the parking lots in Billerica. As I mentioned earlier, the building is assessed at just under $2 million in Billerica. If you take $2 million and take a tax rate of 33.44, you've got a hefty tax bill of over $65,000 per year.
So my concern was just how this is going to impact the current operating budget, which you said brings in 700-some thousand in revenue, and whether there's sufficient give in that budget now. You're hiring a new management firm.
Yeah, exactly. That's going to be our intent. What we had done in the past when we put up the management agreements for 5 years, we had the contractor perform some of the improvements. So, for example, some of these items came to town meeting, such as the structural repair and so forth, and the scoreboard and such. But in terms of the ice dashes and so forth, those works were done by the contractor in terms of in-kind contributions. That will now be relaxed, and now we will address revenue solely coming in on the lease. We're being a little, to be honest, we're being a little hamstrung because we're taking the $1 million and paying for it over a 10-year period from the stormwater effort. If we were to just do this regularly, we probably would have borrowed for at least 15-year period to provide a little bit of a cushion. But we have that $1 million out there, so we're going to do the best that we can to meet that objective and do that.
So you're saying it's going to be tight in the operating budget, but you believe we can manage it?
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Paul Regazio, Precinct 7. I think this is a no-brainer. Anytime that you can buy something that's worth $2.7 million for 1.2, I think it's crazy not to. My only question, and again, we would all do this, if you could buy a car for $10,000 car for $5,000 or something you're using, you do it. My only question is, on the capital improvements, the 1.5, has the state accepted that amount, or is that subject to challenge by the state?
No, that has been accepted by the state. We knew this day was coming. We've been working over the last 5 months or so, submitting, and I really want to credit the efforts, because the work really gets done by the town accountant, Darlene Lucier, and Gary Persichetti, working with our vendor and working with our receipts over the past, 18 years to gather the receipts and documentation that were all submitted and have been accepted by the Inspector General's office. So this isn't our hope that they'll accept the 1.2. This is they have accepted the 1.2.
Okay, thank you. So
1.5
no, that's great. So the numbers are all fixed. So I urge everybody to vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Elaine McDonald, Precinct 1. You mentioned there's land that is mostly in Billerica, whereas most of the parking lot, and there's land in Chelmsford. Is that land all wetlands, or is it some usable land or not?
Most of the land in Chelmsford is wet. There is some usable because that's what we've been using as for the storage of the school buses in the community, and that was done in conjunction with the school department to do two things. One was to keep the cost down because now you had the buses stored in the community, and second, we get the motor vehicle excise from the buses because they're housed in the community. That's why they're parked in that portion of the parking lot. Long term, we're going to get them off the site as we're moving to complete the transaction for the sale of the Katrina Road Brownfield site, and then the buses would go over to that location. But no, most of the land in Chelmsford it's near the highway off-ramp, and it goes behind the building and along where you see the buses. So there really isn't much of a developable portion right there.
So none of that would be used towards the 129 stuff?
No. You really couldn't. You really don't have the frontage.
Okay. I asked this question, so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Janet Dubner, Precinct 6. Are there any insurance implications or liability that we run the risk of if someone gets injured, if we're the owners of the forum?
No, we've been managing and responsible for the operations of the forum for the past 19 years. They are covered under the town's liability insurance policies. Obviously, our vendor has insurance as well. And so, no, in fact, in the 11 years that I've been here, I don't recall any claims coming in. I'm looking at Darlene, she's been here longer than I have. We don't recall any claims coming in from activities at the forum.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? No discussion? There being none, we will now vote on appropriating the funds for the acquisition of the Chelmsford Forum. This requires a 2/3 vote. The article passes 136 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 8 is another significant capital investment for the community that I'm seeking your funding and support for this evening. This is upon the recommendation of the Community Preservation Committee. We're seeking an appropriation of $450,000, which would be borrowed through the Community Preservation Fund, for the reconstruction and expansion of the playground at Roberts Field. Explain where this initiative arose from. We have, and Public Works is responsible for the maintenance and infrastructure of our facilities, including our playground areas. Gary Perschetti oversees the department, and Nick Parley is the individual who's assigned the responsibility in dealing with the day-to-day maintenance and safety at the park. A year ago, we recognized that the playground was coming to the end of this useful life in terms of the safety of the equipment that's on the site, and that it needed to be replaced. With that, we also received interest from the neighborhood and the community as a whole, individuals such as Shana Mickle and Bill Askenberg, saying, wait a minute, the park has been a tremendous resource for the town of Chelmsford. Let's re-examine it and how it can best serve the community in the future. And therefore, we created the Roberts Field Master Plan Committee. They met tirelessly for almost a year, looking over different possibilities with public input forums and examining a vision for that site. They came out with a report and recommendations, of which the critical initial component and really more than half the cost for the improvements have to do with the playground at the site. And so without further ado, the person who I believe can best explain this for you, and he'll provide this presentation, is Bill Askenberg, who has now moved on to become the chair of the Roberts Field Advisory Committee that would assist the Public Works, that if this article is approved, in the construction and ongoing vision and oversight of the activities that take place there. So, Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Good evening. For you guys that have read ahead, I'm sure you've seen that there's quite a few slides here. I promise to try to be as concise and brief as possible. For folks following along at home, I would encourage you to visit robertsfield.org. The presentation that we'll be presenting tonight is also available there. First, I wanted to say that we're going to be presenting a brief overview of the master plan process that we went through, as well touch on some of the key highlights of the master plan process. But I wanted to make clear that tonight we're focusing, and Article 8 focuses specifically on Friendship Park Playground. So the funds that we're seeking are specifically targeted towards Friendship Park Playground. There were a lot of people who have worked on this master plan and who have shared their voice on this plan, literally hundreds. We went through a process where we surveyed park users. We surveyed over 30 different organizations that use the park and some that maybe don't use the park, but wanted to make sure that if they did, that they had a voice in this. In this process. We tried to create a community-driven process that maximized transparency. And I mentioned robertsfield.org. All of our meetings, all of our meeting presentations, agendas, minutes, everything is posted there and has been posted there for the 2.5 years that we've been working on this master plan. There were a number of committee members that served well on this committee. There's also been a number of town liaisons that have worked, including the Board of Selectmen, as well as the Community Development, and also our Conservation Commission that worked on it as well. We also had a number of professionals that helped us with it. So we finished the Improvement Committee process on July 31st when the Board of Selectmen accepted our master plan recommendation. And now we've moved on to, there's a new board, which is the Roberts Field Advisory Committee, and we've been tasked with exploring fundraising opportunities to implement the master plan, actually implementing the master plan, and then talking more about what we're going to be doing tonight with the community build and overseeing that. So why are we here tonight? What's happening at Roberts? Roberts is a highly valued Chelmsford park, and I'm sure we'd be hard-pressed to find anyone in this room that doesn't have a warm spot in their heart for either Friendship Park or for the athletic fields, ponds, or nature trails that are there. It was recently rated as one of the 4th highest rated parks in Chelmsford in an open space and recreation plan that was conducted this year. Friendship Park is obviously a heavily used playground. The athletic fields are used by both Chelmsford Youth Lacrosse and Chelmsford Youth Baseball for their under 12 leagues. As I mentioned, there's nature trails, there's winter skating at the pond, and as well there's Pollinator Park, which was put in within the last 2 years. The natural areas of the park are overrun with invasives, and that was addressed in our master plan recommendation. The athletic fields are unfortunately commonly unusable. There's drainage issues and divot issues in the outfields. But most importantly, and why we're here tonight, is that the playground has really become unsafe. It was built in September of 1995 with a 20-year life expectancy. The DPW has determined that it is unsafe and it poses a threat, and they've characterized it as saying that we're living on borrowed time with this. So for the last 2.5 years, we've been trying to get this plan together to get the playground replaced. Our master plan included, we really went through the entire park and tried to address the park in its entirety, and we came up with a dozen different areas of improvements. And I encourage you, if you're interested in the master plan, to visit robertsfield.org. There is a complete list of, and a lot more information in the master plan for each of these different categories. But tonight, as I mentioned, we're only talking about the larger natural playground. The key highlights for the plan. The total improvements for the plan was between $700,000 and $850,000. We did find existing town budgets that could fund parts of that for $47,000 or $66,000, and we hope to find other parts in capital plan, such as we have included in the plan to add security cameras, and we hope that maybe there's a capital expense or there's other things in the plan that we can find budgets for that. The major recommended parts of the plan were the new, larger, ADA-compliant, inclusive designed, nature-themed playground, new lacrosse and baseball fields, an interior walking track with an exercise circuit, and we recommended adding some machines that would specifically target, specifically be available for seniors, so stretching stations or elliptical machines, those types of things. A new bathroom shade structure using porta potties. Multi-use pavilion on the pond side that would benefit wintertime skating as well as summer use. Pond dredging, we had a wetland scientist consult on the project, and the pond is actually filling in with sediment. So she estimated that we would probably end up losing the pond within 15 to 25 years. We've noticed in the last couple of years that the levels have gotten significantly higher, sediment levels have been higher, so it actually may happen faster than that. So our recommendation in the master plan was that the dredging would take place within 3 to 5 years, if that's possible. We also had other natural area improvements, new gardens, irrigation systems, and developed a process to address the invasive plants that are there. And I mentioned the security cameras. This is the site plan for the new master plan. On the western side, you'll see, upper western side, you'll see sort of a pink area. That's the maximum footprint for the playground. Adjacent to that would be the new lacrosse field, and then the baseball fields are behind that. Encircling those is the new interior walking trail with exercise circuits ringing that. And then up by engine 3, which is on the northeastern side of the parking lot, there's a new hardscape children's play area, similar to what you would find in an elementary school playground with sort of hopscotch and foursquare and those types of things. One of the things that I want to point out too with this is that the committee did inventory all of the trees within the buildable area of the project. So we have a very good inventory of the trees that are there, the conditions that they're in, the sizes that they're in, and we also created tree protection guidelines. So when the implementation of the master plan is put into place, those trees will be protected. And I'll get into more about the playground for that. This is a look at the total budget, and we've highlighted the playground. The playground, as you can see, is 50% of the budget, so it's really the biggest ticket item in the master plan budget. After that, it's going to be the cost to redo the athletic fields, and then really the pond dredging, which is an expensive item. It's about $100,000. That would be the third highest thing in the natural areas of the park. But I think you can see in these categories that we've tried to address the concerns that we found in the park in total. And once again, in the master plan, if you go to see, there's budget items for each of these different categories. Specifically the playground. So the playground budget, we created a range of between $393,000 and $456,000. And that budget is based on creating a playground that has prefab natural play equipment. That natural equipment budget would include the custom design process, ramps, accessible equipment, and wood chips. We also added landform play areas, more open areas that would allow kids and adults to sort of be in closer connection with nature. Things like berms or rolling hills or things that would allow kids to run and play and sort of romp. We also have the thing, and one of the things that's really driving this budget, a strong driver to this budget, is the accessible play surfaces. So these are the rubber type surfaces that would allow wheelchair access and allow all types of people with different disabilities or people of all different abilities to get to the equipment and to use the equipment. And then you'll see we have the information for picnic tables, playground benches, information kiosks, and such and so forth. Also important to note that during this whole process, we worked, we had several abutters that attended almost all of our meetings. So we had very good input from abutters and neighbors. We included in the design in the budget sound and visual mitigation, and I'll show you an example of that. So this is a close-up of the site plan that you saw earlier. This is the maximum playground footprint. And so what the committee tried to do was, first we tried to define an overall, or at least the community's expectations for the budget. And those expectations came from the different park user surveys, all the stakeholder surveys, all the information that we gathered. And once we identified those expectations, we tried to identify the maximum available playground footprint, meaning that we wanted to, one of the expectations was that we would be able to incorporate the trees and the existing landscape at Friendship Park into the new playground. So we wanted to say this, okay, when we get a designer to come and design the playground, this is the area you have to work with. So that's what that area is. That's the maximum available footprint for it. On the western side, you'll notice there's a sort of a ringed off area. That is the visual and sound mitigating abutter landscaping area. So the idea there is that would be a berm and some sort of landscaping that would help keep the noise down for the abutters. So I mentioned the expectations for the project. Expectations would be that the playground would be fully ADA compliant, would be accessible, and I'll get into what accessible means in a minute. Would use inclusive playground design and would have more open views. You might know that Friendship Park is more structure heavy now, and there were a lot of discussion around trying to create a playground or a play area that didn't have so many closed off areas where parents could kind of see where the kids were and sort of keep a better eye on them, keep things more open. The playground would be larger. I mentioned right now the playground is about 0.32 acres. The maximum area available area that we've defined is 0.89 acres, so it's roughly an acre in size max. We don't expect that the playground would take up this full size, but at least that's the maximum available that the designer would have to work with. It would be a mix of landform and prefabricated natural playground equipment. And the idea there is that having a nature-themed playground would tie in nicely with the Roberts Field Park that has the nature trails, and has Pollinator Park, and has the garden. So it's a nice natural neighborhood-type friendly park now. We'd have a separated toddler area. I mentioned the inventory trees would be incorporated. We'd have to be able to segregate the natural areas so that the DPW would be able to, facilities would be able to maintain those areas. We'd have shade structures, picnic tables and benches, perimeter fencing around the entire, at least we budgeted for the entire area of the park. We would use the engraved bricks. I know that was a big consideration and for the public about that. Adding electricity to the park, security lighting, and cameras and garbage cans and racks. And then the community build installation, that's a really important thing, and we'll get into more about what that means. So inclusive play, what is inclusive play design and nature playground theme? The inclusive design is really, it's a relatively new way to design playgrounds, and it develops a design that allows people of all abilities to play together in the same space. So it's not just a segregated, this equipment's for this and this equipment's for that. It's all put together in the same place, and you have surfaces that allow anybody with any abilities to get to and from those areas. And I mentioned the natural playground, really open areas of green lawns, rolling hills, berms, and landscaping. And these are just a few pictures of some of the things that the committee identified as things that they'd like to see in the new playground. So I mentioned surfaces and equipment. Those are really, if you've taken a look at the budget, it is a big ticket. But really what's driving the cost are the surfaces and the equipment. And there's three things to look at distinctions to look at when you look at playground accessibility. One, ADA compliance, and that's really just getting people access to. Engineered wood chips can be considered ADA compliant if there's a maintenance plan in place to make sure that the berms and stuff are raked out. Accessible playgrounds provide not only access, but places and equipment for people to use. And then inclusive, as I mentioned, allows people to play all together. So it's all sort of put into one big bundle. The playground surfaces, the poured-in-place rubber, the mats, the bonded rubber mulch, and synthetic turfs are just more expensive. They just cost more than engineered wood chips. And I mentioned the wood chips are accessible if they have the weekly raking for wheelchairs. And I also wanted to mention that part of our process was to talk to public safety officials, and Chief Ryan did ask that less wood chips be used in the design from a safety perspective. And our overall design would be a mix of all types of surfaces. So it would still be wood chips, but it just wouldn't be as much. So the committee defined the maximum available area, defined the budget, defined the expectations, and now the process. So the process really starts with, it's a design and construction process. And the custom playground design process, there's a lot of ways to do it, but there's one way that I think is really kind of a neat way, and I wanted to cite this Joey's Playground in Belmont, Mass, which used kind of a common way of doing it. They have a design day, so a playground designer, downloads all the information from the committee and from the community about what the expectations are. Then they actually go into the schools and into a classroom, and they sit with the children and have the children design what their favorite playground would look like. And they take those designs, and then they actually sit in a cafeteria and sketch out the designs, sit down later with the committee and the community that day, rough out some sketches, and then come back and present that sketch to them. So that's really kind of neat. This is some examples of the pictures of how that process played out at Joey's Playground. The community build process is also built into the budget. And this is an important cost saver. This can save as much as a quarter to a third off of your playground equipment budget. But really, the biggest benefit is that it brings the community into the park. It gives the community ownership of the new playground. And this is an example of a Sherburne playground in Sherburne, Mass. They took 10 weeks, they started 10 weeks prior to the custom build installation. They started getting volunteers, and I hope that if this passes tonight, that we'll see many of you involved in this process as well. There was about 3 weeks of demolition and site prep, and then for 5 days, they had 3 different shifts of people working to get the equipment installed. So that was with 40 to 50 volunteers per day. So you can see a lot of people are involved in the process. A lot of people are getting engaged in the process, and a lot of people will take ownership of the process. So it's not just one-off individuals. It's organizations and churches and schools, and a lot of people get involved. So I wanted to point out, and the town manager mentioned this, that the town is going to be responsible for determining the funding schedule and the implementation schedule, and they have designated the replacing the playground as a priority. The custom build playground project part will be led by the town DPW, and then the Robertsfield Advisory Committee would help with consulting on that. Some of these milestones, if we're able to successfully seek funding for tonight, we should be able to open the new playground in June of 2018, which should meet our recommendation of trying to have as little downtime as possible between when the old playground is taken out and when the new playground is put in. And that was as fast as I could say it. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 8.
Does the Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen, by a vote of 3 to 1, recommends approval.
Okay. Now is the opportunity for question and answer and discussion.
Andy Sillings, Precinct 7. Bill, that sounds really good, very good.
Thank you.
But when I was reading, you did have one line item about the parking area that's going to be worked at. And I know I drive by it every day almost, and when there are a couple of games going in there, it's full. So do you meant to expand the parking area at all?
So 2 things. One, we surveyed the usage of the fields by the stakeholders. We looked at both Chelmsford Youth Baseball and lacrosse's expected usage. And what came back with those numbers, and those numbers again are available in the master plan, is that there should be enough parking spaces. The other side of that is that we were able to, through reconfiguring the parking spaces and adding 2 small parking areas, decks, extensions of the parking area, we were able to add in 15 new spaces. So at the end of that process, we believe that there should be plenty of parking. There shouldn't be any need for off-street parking with those changes.
Okay. I didn't mean to say that it's full all the time, but when you have 2 games going on, then it's really full. Maybe those 5 extra will be enough, but maybe you just want to look at that.
Yeah, and I agree, it is. It does get tight in there during the games, especially in the spring. And that's one of the reasons why we looked at the actual schedules with Chelmsford Youth Baseball to see, and because they would be the ones that would know the best. Thank you.
Chicky Regazio, Precinct 7. I just want to thank you and your committee for the work that you've done and presented to us tonight. And I recommend that we vote yes on this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I thought I'd have more time to not be nervous. My name is Colin Haberl. I live on Elm Street in Chelmsford. I don't anticipate that this is a controversial issue necessarily, but I wanted to be here anyway, and my wife made sure that I was here. I have 3 small children, 3 girls, 5 months old, and a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, and I'm just here to, to say that we very much support this, And we really have two options for playground in our town. And there's Friendship Park, and there's Varney, which is a little over 20 minutes away from where we are, which may not sound like a lot, but with the anybody that has kids and knows the scheduling of the day, it can be a lot. And they right now, I mean, my kids really enjoy being there and enjoy being with their little friends and everything. But I will say that one thing that I'm a little bit embarrassed about is that recently I'm at the playground and I'm looking at the structures and everything seem pretty solid. But one thing that I didn't consider, and I think as parents sometimes we think about our kids and we get sort of the blinders on. And when I opened the material and I was looking over the slides, I'm almost embarrassed to say that I really wasn't thinking of kids that are differently abled, and how now that I think back to being in the playground a few days ago, I can see how there really there aren't options for kids that are differently abled, and I think that's I just want to say I think that's great. I think that's great that that's a part of this. So, thanks for the consideration, and yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Neil Lerer, Precinct 6. The article asks for $450,000. So is the plan just to put in the natural playground first and then come back to town meeting for the athletic fields and everything else?
Yeah, this is just funding this first phase of the park. There are future phases, as was noted in the presentation. We also have future phases at Varney Playground, and I think we have 13 playgrounds in total in the community. So we will try to address those as we can, as money allows and time permits.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, Danielle Evans, Precinct 9. So first I have a correction. In your presentation, you have notes about the cost of the Southborough Playground. And I can tell you, I led that effort. I spent years of my life on that effort, and the numbers are wrong. And I just want to make sure that this body knows what the correct numbers are and looking at this. So the total cost of Southborough was $1,038.287. Of that, we had $62,801 in insurance funds because of a fire that happened during our fundraising process. On top of that, we weren't happy. That wasn't enough for us. So the PTO, which is many parents in the support of this community, spent months furiously fundraising while our kids had no playground at a school playground, had no playground to play on. And we raised total, by the time of the playground build, $85,729. Of that, $75,486 went in to the playground construction as a supplement to the insurance funds. We left a $10,000 maintenance fund that is still being used to this day, and none of that was coming to any town meeting or any board, to anybody, and asking for money. It was all fundraised through corporate sponsorships, through grants, through anything we could honestly get our hands on to get this for our kids. Now, I can tell you during that process, the other parents I did that with, we drove around the area and we looked at different playgrounds, and we sat and we looked at all the books, and we saw so much that we loved and so much that we wanted for the kids. Now, Southborough is a highly used playground because we have soccer fields attached to it, and it's a playground that's open to every single kid, not just in this community, but anybody if school is not in session. And we wanted badly to make it ADA accessible. We wanted badly to, have the fancy landscaping and the fancy equipment, and we went around in like Concord and Lexington, and we saw that fancy equipment. But what we did was we came back and we sat down and we looked at what do we have between the insurance funds and the funds that we could put together. What is it we have? And we put together a playground that, while it was an ADA compliant, was pretty close. I mean, it was close, and it was kind of getting there, but there was a lot else to really make it ADA compliant and to make it what we wanted to. But the one thing that I learned in that whole journey, and the journey that I'm no longer at Southborough, my kids have graduated, but for years after that, I was head of that playgrounds committee and the maintenance, the group trying to maintain it. And it's hard to maintain playgrounds with just volunteers. Let me tell you that. I've lived that. It is hard. You can't 100% count on that. You're not paying them. And the one thing I learned was I went around, and this was even before we had Nick Parley on board, but since, we have 13 playgrounds in this town, and they're spread throughout the town. And if you look at our schools, and I'm sorry, but my personal belief here is that our school playgrounds take priority because those are our kids and what they're playing on during the day. I mean, one of our playgrounds is at Westlands, which is our CHIPS program, which is an integrated preschool. We have kids that are specifically there because they have special needs. I mean, that is the place, if you're going to put accessible equipment, we really need it there. And the one thing I did learn is, historically, it has been the PTOs in this town that have been on the hook for fundraising for school playgrounds. And my concern is, so this is all great and wonderful here tonight, but we have Byam and Center and Westlands that all have great needs with their playgrounds coming up. We have Varney Park that still has a similar wooden structure that you're talking about taking down here. And you know what? In an ideal world, I would love every single one of our 13 playgrounds in Chelmsford to look like this. I think it would be phenomenal. I would love to be able to live in a community that could pull that off. But the reality is, if I've learned one major thing over my 10+ years as a town meeting rep, is that we don't have the money for everything we want. And we need to set priorities, and we have to make sure when we divvy out money that there is equity. There is equity to the school playgrounds. There is equity to Varney. There's equity to Harmony. There's equity to all these playgrounds. And what has always happened in these efforts that I've seen in town and been involved with that has blown me away is the groups of volunteers that come together to do the fundraising, to get the corporate sponsorships, to get the grants. I spent 10 minutes on Google today, and I came up with a huge list of grants. Because let me tell you something, if you're building an accessible playground, corporations, they want to give you money. Individual donors, it's easy. And grants, there's plentiful. The shade structure, I identified a grant for a shade structure for South Row, because South Row, that's like the only way you're going to get it, is through a grant. There's no money. So, and I did that before I left. So I guess what I'm saying here is I'd love to be able to say, as a responsible town meeting rep, vote for this and give this to the kids. I wish we had the money. But my concern is what happens not only to the other playgrounds in town when they come for money, and also this is CPC funds, so it's not just about playgrounds. I mean, there's open space, there's historic preservation, there's affordable housing, and those groups have historically come before the CPC with some sort of matching fundraising and grant money before they do their ask to CPC. And I just wish today you were coming to us with, this is what we fundraise, this is our corporate sponsorships, our grants, this is what we could get, and we just need this portion of the money to go forward on this. There's within a 6-minute drive in Westford, there's the Rona McGillicuddy playground that is 100% ADA accessible. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful. I've taken my kids there. If you go on their website, we were just doing this, there is a huge list of donors, including like Kronos and Lowell General and individual donors and in-kind donors of equipment. That was completely fundraised for. And I'm not saying this should be 100% fundraised, but I would like to see the buy-in, because you know what, when the PTOs of those 3 other elementary schools and the group at Varney and the other groups for these playgrounds come along, they're going to have to do a buy-in. They're going to have to come up with fundraising and grant money, and I think that standard needs to be equitable throughout this town. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, could I respond to that?
No, there's no debate from that microphone. I mean, you can get in line. Go ahead.
Yeah, Judy Carvin, Precinct 7. Bill Eskenberg, what are the current plans from your committee for fundraising?
Thank you for asking. So just to clarify, the Robertsfield Improvement Committee was charged with creating a master plan. We weren't charged with fundraising. The new Robertsfield Advisory Committee is charged with fundraising. We had our first meeting on October 4th. And we, at that meeting, discussed making fundraising a priority, which it is. And I agree wholeheartedly with you, Danielle. I think that, and I would hope that you would be, I'm sorry, I don't know, there you are. I hope you'd be involved with the process moving forward, because I know you do have a wealth of information. I remember the Monopoly games that you guys sold and all the other information that you guys did for the fundraising. We expect that we will have corporate sponsors. We expect that we will have grant writing. I wholeheartedly agree there are a litany of grants available. The issue that's driving, or what brought us here today for funding, is that the playground as it exists now is unsafe. And we surveyed the community. The community said that they wanted this type of playground. It wasn't something that we just came up with on our own. This is what we heard loud and clear. And the community also said that they wanted to minimize the downtime between having the structure that is there now taken out and the new structure put in place. I actually spoke with Jim Osiro's office today, the representative's office, to get a better understanding of how the state funding works. And they're basically they reimburse basically the municipal expenditures. So they would require the municipality to say this is the plan, this is how it's going to be paid for, then they would reimburse those dollars back to the town. And I don't know if you wanted to speak to that, Mr. Manager, but that's how I would expect that the fundraising would be treated as well.
Okay, but that's your first priority, is fundraising for this.
It's a priority. I would say that if we were successful in getting approval for Article 8 tonight, our first priority would be to craft with the cooperation of the DPW, to craft a RFP to be able to find a design and construction or a design firm to work on the plan, so that then if we have a plan, then we can say, then we can go out and fundraise for it. You know, it's a lot easier to go and sell something if you know exactly what's in that plan. And during the process that the improvement committee went through, we did identify, you know, 2 handfuls of organizations that were willing to donate, but they wanted more information about, you know, what are we going to buy, and that's what we need. We need that plan to do that.
Okay, that's great. I have a question for Mr. Manager, please. Of all the playgrounds in the town of Chelmsford, how many are accessible at any time of day by parents, grandparents, and children?
Roberts Field, Varney, Harmony Park, Southwell, and the rest are at the schools. Yeah.
So they're not accessible to the community during school hours?
That's correct.
All right.
The remaining aren't, but the others are general public.
Okay,
market.
thank you. Mr. Manager, I have another question for you, please. Would you be kind enough to address my colleagues and explain the $450,000 from community preservation, the expectation of the fundraising from the Community Preservation Committee, and the expectation of perhaps having leftover money to be given back to community preservation? Can you explain that meeting? Please?
You're a member of the Community Preservation Committee.
am.
Perhaps you could better explain it.
Come on, you're the big guy. You're the boss.
Yeah, I was present at the Community Preservation Committee meeting, and I think you've just sort of summarized it. The goal is to do the project. We were conservative in our estimate for the $450,000.
can appreciate the frustration if you've come previously with fundraising and it looks like we're just coming in for a big ask, but it's really necessitated by the time frame. I have a 3-year-old and a 10-month-old, and I expect to spend an inordinate amount of time at Friendship Park, assuming it's there in the next foreseeable future of my life. But I'm really hoping that we can make sure that there is a park, because that's really what is the push now to actually get all this money up front. I really hope that we can return to the town as much of it as we can going, and as, I'm sorry, I forgot the ladies, as Danielle pointed out, given that we are going after an accessible playground, we will have access to a lot more grants and funds, and so we should have opportunities to bring in more funds than a accessible playground. And I think the name of Friendship Park, it's the perfect park in town to have an accessible playground where kids of all abilities can play together and be friends, being able to play together on something that's accessible to all. And I really hope that you guys will all support it, because I think it's a really beautiful park. And I will say that when my husband and I moved to town 4 years ago and bought our house, we saw the park down the street and we're like, I really like this neighborhood because there's this park. And I can tell you that having a park in the neighborhood and having a nice park in the neighborhood only helps properties in the neighborhood. It is a big seller for people who are looking to have families in the near future. And I just really hope that you all consider voting for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kathy Tuberty, Precinct 1. So $450,000 is a lot of money, but in your plan, you show that there's another $450,000 still to go. It's a little intimidating, comes out to almost $1 million. Know that my children grew up at Roberts Field. I didn't realize when it was built, but my little one was 1, so she played there all the time, and she's taken children that she used to babysit there. So we love Friendship Park. My son and my daughters actually played on Roberts Field. Huge
to enact. But yes, absolutely. And there's a lot there, and we fully intend to try to find folks to, like I said, try to sponsor it or do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8.
I share some of the frustration with some of the previous speakers about this ask at this time. It really feels like coming to the town with your hand out saying, please give us money, when all these other groups who have built parks, whether it be the playgrounds at the schools or the dog park, basically came with fundraising already prepared. And I understand your reasoning on the timing, sort of, but given that you have a master plan, you could have gone to some of the local businesses and at least gotten commitments saying, if the town approves this, we'll donate some money. And I think that would have showed a little more preparedness, a little more interest in the community in participating in this. I am overall for improving Friendship Park, for doing this work, but I think you may be a little bit early in the ask from the town because you're just asking for $450,000. So one of my questions is, if you get $300,000 in grants in sponsorships, does that money come back to the town, or does that go into the park as well? Does it become $750 to the park?
It depends what the nature of the grants are provided. I mean, for example, a company may want to donate specific equipment. You know, it may go beyond the playground and so forth. It would really depend upon what was there. I think you're going to have a hard time just collecting donations from sponsors, corporate sponsors and others to say, well, we want to do this so we can give the money back to the town. I mean, that's not going to be an attractive ask. So I wouldn't want to sit there and say, oh yes, dollar for dollar is going to go back and reduce the town's levy. I think what you can do, again, is target donations to specific types of equipment and areas in the park, and therefore the aggregate, when it's all done, is less than the presented total cost of the project in terms of the town funding the entire share.
So what happens to any money that's not spent of this $450 that if we vote for this right now?
If money is not expended, then it's basically appropriated but not expended. Town meeting in the future would vote to release the money back to the Community Preservation General Fund.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kit Harbison, Precinct 7. I haven't been involved with recent past of Roberts Field at all, but I'd like if you could talk a little bit about the volunteer efforts that have happened in the recent past in advance of your forming the Master Plan Committee and the Advisory Committee.
Well, my personal experience is that I founded the Friends of Roberts Field in 2013. During that, in founding that, we were able to work with the town to create the nature trails that are there now. And a biggest part of that was finding scouts to build the different wooden bridges and trail areas that are there. So, you know, the Friends group offered volunteer support, but it was really through the sweat labor of Eagle Scouts that built that. The Girl Scouts have also been very involved in Roberts Field. They actually built the skate shack that's there now. They also built, there's a natural playground that's on the outside, sort of natural play structures that are on the outside, the entrance to Roberts Field. They built that there as well. Before I got involved with Roberts Field from a volunteer standpoint, I know that there's the original skate shack that was there, Pond Side, was built as a Eagle Scout project, as was the entryway that's there to Friendship Park now was an Eagle Scout project. So there is a ton of volunteer stuff that's going on there.
So my point is that there has been an ongoing volunteer effort to keep this area improved. It's not as if you're coming here asking for an open handout when no work has been done up to now. So I urge everyone to support this article.
Thank you.
Hi, Johanna Shaw, Precinct 9. I wanted to say that you guys have done a great job with the design on this. I have 3 boys, ages 4, 5, and 7. I've shown them the pictures of your design that were in the handouts, and they were really excited about it. And as a mom, I'm really excited about the design because it's open, and when my 3 boys want to go that way and that way and that way, I can see them all, which you can't do at Friendship Park right now. And that playground is definitely showing its age. However, my boys, when we decide to go out to a playground, even though South Row has a great one, 2 of them go to school there, and they're on that one every day. So they ask, even though we live 3/4 of a mile down the road from South Row, they ask to go to Friendship Park, and we drive over there because they like variety. So while there is something to be said, like a previous speaker had mentioned about, paying attention to the school playgrounds because our kids are there all the time, our kids also like to go elsewhere. So all of the playgrounds deserve attention, and this is the one that needs the attention right now because of the state that it's in. Also, to the point of the people who are coming up saying that fundraising should be done, I want to point out that there's a whole slide here about the community build process, and labor is not free. If you do the math here, 5 days of staffed installation, 3 shifts a day at 50 volunteers a shift, that's 750 man-hours that they're asking for volunteers. So in effect, that is a fundraising plan.
Thank you.
David Foley, Precinct 5. Mr. Moderator, through you to the presenter. I was just wondering what is the expected lifespan of the park that you're planning on putting in, and when you look at different plans, do they come in different quality levels, and what are you targeting for the lifespan for this playground?
That's a great question. Thank you for asking. First, let me say that the existing Friendship Park structure had a 20 to 25-year lifespan, and in researching this project, we found that there are a lot of communities that are in the exact same boat as we're in. They're all of these wood and steel structures that these communities built 20 years ago, are failing and needing replacement. The new structures generally have, depending on what equipment is put in it, generally have a 30 to a 50-year lifespan. And I want to point out that the design is really going to be the driver for dictating the lifespan. So a certain piece of equipment, depending on use, is going to have obviously maybe a shorter lifespan than something that doesn't get as much play as others. So in terms of specific lifespan, that'll really be determined once the design is done. But generally, it's 30 to 50 years. And I also want to point out, too, that one of the charges for the new advisory board is to create a detailed maintenance plan. So that maintenance plan will include not only maintenance for the natural areas of the park, but also maintenance for the structures as well. So once we have that structure list in place, we'll be able to say, if it's rubber surfaces that need to be resurfaced or sealed every 2 years, then that gets built into the plan. If it's swing set, swing things that need to be changed out every 10 to 15 years, then that gets built into it. So we'll try to build as much of that information into the plan as possible so we can anticipate maintenance issues down the line.
Sue Carter, Precinct 5. I just want to say that I think it's premature to ask town meeting for money. The reason being is I was involved with Friends of Southwell Park. I was involved with some of the dog park. People are more likely, especially corporations, are likely to donate if they think their donation is going to help get something built. Not that you already have, it means you get less from the town. I also think that, like even Varney Playground had fundraisers, I think it builds more of a sense of community, and you pull in other people who may not physically be able to give you a weekend to help plant a butterfly garden or help with the maintenance, and I think really builds a sense of community. So my suggestion would be take the time between now and Springtown meeting and do fundraising. Get the corporate sponsorships, go for the grants, and then come back to town meeting afterwards. I just think it really builds a stronger sense of community. I had, I forget what I was doing, I had somebody call me and say, do you know how we can get bricks for Friendship Park?
Her older kids had one, and now her younger kids wanted it. So it really gave people a sense of community and a sense of ownership for the park. And I'd like to encourage you to do that and perhaps come back at Springtown meeting for the difference between what your fundraising efforts yielded and what you need to get that park constructed. It probably is not going to make that big a difference in terms of time-wise, but you may have a little more community with this park was donated by the so-and-so family, and it gives people a sense of belonging to it, which I think Friendship Park currently has. People want to go and see their brick. I think it really builds a lot of community towards the future of the park, and I'd encourage you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin Reddy, Precinct 1. I own actually one of those bricks, and that Eagle Scout project, the gateway, is mine. I remember building that in 1995. Thank you. I remember building that in 1995, and it was in addition to the park that was already built there. And that I know that there was a lot of community outreach. A lot of people showed up to help build not only my Eagle Scout project and other Eagle Scout projects there, but also that playground. I find that it has reached the end of its usable life. As a parent of two young boys, ages 3 and 5, I mean, I'll go through a couple different things here, but they love that park. I enjoy bringing them there because I participated in it, so from a community involvement perspective, I think there's great benefit there. But because it's now reached the end of its usable life, and no one is maintaining it because it was built by volunteers with volunteer money that isn't there anymore, it's imperative that the town step up and actually fund the continued help for this park, right? Keep it going so that the usable life can last longer than the 22 years that we've seen so far. I'm speaking in favor of this, even though I assume that the gateway will probably come down as part of this. So I urge you to vote in favor of this bill, this proposal, because it really only helps our community. And one final note, you cannot bring your children to the schools when the schools are open and in session. So if you have a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old that is not in school, you only have a selective number of places you can bring them. And Friendship Park should be the crown jewel for where you bring your children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Cristiano, Precinct 9. I'd like to move the question.
We have a motion to move the question. This is not subject to debate. It takes 2/3 vote, so a vote for yes means that there will be no longer any debate, and we will then vote on the underlying article. That's going to pass. Okay, the motion passes 123 in favor, 12 opposed. So now we're going to be voting on Article 8, which authorizes the Community Preservation Commission to borrow $450,000 for the reconstruction, expansion, and enhancement of the playground at Roberts Field.
2/3. Sorry, it's a 2/3 vote.
The article passes 113 in favor, 21 opposed, 2 abstentions. Mr.
Yeah,
Manager?
Mr. Moderator, Article 9, this will be a lot quicker than the previous few articles. We're seeking to transfer $1,041,381 from free cash into the General Stabilization Fund. As John Souza noted in his presentation at the beginning of the evening, our current balance is $8.9 million. We'll transfer in the $1,041,000, would bring the fund up to $9.98 million. The town's financial policy is to maintain a stabilization fund balance between 5 and 10% of the town's operating budget. We anticipate that later on this fiscal year, after the tax rate is set, when we reach agreement with the public safety unions on the new collective bargaining agreements that will take place for a 2 fiscal year period, the previous fiscal year and the current fiscal year, that we probably would use approximately $250,000 of that to fund those agreements, and then the balance of $9.73 million would be approximately 7.6% of the town's $128 million budget, or basically right in that mid-range point that we've been targeting. I'd also remind the people that, the reps, that when we were here at Springtown meeting, we took a $729,954,000 withdrawal from the stabilization fund to address operating budget increases that were unforeseen, such as the snow and ice cost. We had a minor collective bargaining agreement that was reached, and we also had to deal with the school HVAC system improvements that were taking place over the summer. And at that time, when we were asked to withdraw that money from the stabilization fund of almost $730,000, we were asked, well, will the town generate free cash to replenish that fund? And I recall the town accountant and I assured you at that time that yes, we anticipated we'd finish the year with roughly about $1 million in free cash that we could then replenish this money. And so in essence, that's what we're seeking to do under this article. So again, we'd ask for your favorable motion to approve this request this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 9.
Board of Selectmen have a recommendation?
Board of Selectmen recommend approval by a vote of 4-0.
Okay, so procedural matter, there was an amendment that was filed by Mr. Regazio. Are you withdrawing that, or are you?
Comment?
Sure.
I want to thank again, I try to make an amendment to this article, but let me explain. Before that, I do want to thank the town manager in the town operations for operating the town to generate this $1 million, actually almost a $2 million savings over the budget, of which we used a portion of it, and also for having the almost $10 million of stabilization fund. I tried to, in the amendment, to change the amendment and take $500,000 of the surplus money and apply it to the current year budget. This would have saved individual taxpayers probably $25 to $50 a year in real estate tax. We're probably looking to a $200, $300 real estate tax on average for the town. I tried to amend this article, but I was, stopped because it was not within the precepts or whatever the term is for legally. My comment is, I suggest that the town manager and the town selectmen in the future, when they write this article and they plan or they want to transfer the surplus cash to the stabilization fund, they do write the article in such a way that the town people, not the managers, not the selectmen, can decide what to do with the surplus funds that we have. Right now, we only can agree on transferring the $1 million to the stabilization fund. And again, that precludes us from operating. I suggest in the future, as I said, the town manager, the town, the selectmen write this article so that a portion can be used for reduction of the current year taxes. Thank you.
Right, and in all fairness, Mr. Regazio, you were advised by town council that you could have amended your motion so that the additional money that you wanted reduced to go into free cash and then bring it in April for a reduction, but you just couldn't do it now.
Yeah. Again, that would not have impacted current year tax bills that we're going to get.
Right, because you can't do it that way, sir.
Oh, I understand. I agree. All I'm suggesting is in the future, this article be written in such a way that the town people, the elected officials can allocate the money potentially to reducing the current year taxes. That's all. If that's done, then that would be allowed. Is that correct? They don't have to put a number to it, but just allow
that a portion of this, of the free cash be used to reduce current year taxes.
Well, they would have to specify exactly what they're doing.
So they just specify that $1 goes to, reduce the current year taxes, and then we can change the $1 to whatever we agree if we have a large surplus. I don't want the town manager and the selectmen
I
deciding
don't
on-
believe you can. I don't believe you can change the current tax year. It would have to be for the successive tax year, I believe.
Well,
But in any event, we understand, Mr. Regazio, your point.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any additional discussion on this?
Brian Latina, Precinct 4. I'm completely floored by this. Are you saying that we can either vote the entire amount in or nothing?
No, that's not what I said at all. What I said was that you could reduce the amount, but it would go back into free cash.
And that's not what the amendment was.
Right.
So you can,
That doesn't, what I want to do is reduce the tax impact, because $1 $300 real estate tax increase.
Mr. Moderator, in the past, we've had precedents where we've reduced our tax by free cash to our taxpayers.
Again,
And-
I'm relying on the advice of town council, who's advised me that you cannot reduce this current year's taxes. And I don't know if
It's beyond the scope of the article. The article is to appropriate from free cash a sum of money into the general stabilization fund. The choice is to vote the entire amount or a lesser amount. What I think is being explained is that if you vote a lesser amount, it just remains in free cash. There is no methodology under this article to reduce the tax levy for the current fiscal year when the tax rate is set in November, December timeframe.
So it's just a language. In the
No,
past...
it's how the article is written. That was Mr. Regazio's point.
I understand it.
That's his point, yeah.
Town meeting is responsible, as the legislative body of this
Yes.
town, to determine how much money, how much taxes come out of our pockets and go into the town coffers. In the past, Mr. Moderator, town council has assisted our non-expert,
well,
he's an expert, in our financial rewriting of how to do something that we would like to do. I think Mr.
And Mr. Latina, in all due respect, what has happened in the past is that the article which was submitted had the blessing of either the Board of Selectmen, but it was presented in such a way that a certain amount of the free cash would go into stabilization and another portion would be going into taxes. That was not what was presented, and it's beyond the scope of this article.
Okay. And we did not assist Mr. Regazio in changing it so that half...
No, you cannot exceed the scope of the original article because there are people who receive notification of this who would have an opportunity possibly to oppose exactly what Mr. Regazio wishes to do, but is not aware of it, so they cannot come in and say why they're opposing it. You have to give fair notice to our citizens.
So town meeting can vote up or down now. We're not allowed to change figures anymore?
No, you can change the figures and put it into free cash. That's what you can do. The end result would be to reduce it to put it into free cash. Thank you. Any further discussion? Apparently not. Okay, all those in favor of Article 9, please vote. A yes vote will be to transfer $1,041,382 from free cash into the stabilization fund. So the article passes 123 in favor, 8 opposed, no abstentions.
Okay, Mr. Moderator, I think we can get one more article in.
If we can do it, I'll be glad to.
Article 10 is a real brief article. It's a request from the Community Preservation Fund to replenish its recreation and open space improvement funds. The Community Preservation Committee periodically comes to town meeting and asks for an appropriation of $50,000 for the open space fund and also for the recreational use fund to fund many of the projects that you heard earlier described regarding our parklands, such as accessible swings over at the Hart Pond and a canoe launch over at Varney and Eagle Scout projects. Those are the type of things that come from the recreational use fund. And then from the open space fund, they fund efforts such as the recent improvements over at the library park and other such initiatives. So what's taking place here is a replenishment of those funds from the Community Preservation Fund, so the committee during the course of the fiscal year, as they meet monthly, will be able to receive and fund these small type of requests. So the Community Preservation Committee and I request your funding consideration to basically restore the funds by an additional $50,000 to allow those efforts to continue until such time that they need to be replenished in the future again. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. How does the Finance Committee recommend on this?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 10.
And the Board of Selectmen?
Board of Selectmen voted 4-0 to recommend approval.
Any discussion? Questions? There being none, all those in favor of Article 10, which replenishes the Community Preservation Fund, Recreational and Open Space Capital Improvement Funds with $50,000 each for a total appropriation of $100,000, please vote yes. Article passes unanimously, 124 in favor, no opposed, and no abstentions.
A motion to adjourn until Thursday evening?
Okay, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn until Thursday, October 19th, I believe, at 7:30 at the Senior Center. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? See you Thursday.